So I've been pointed to, which means I can start. So the summer came and went, and it's over again. And these are the closing days activities, and the reason I know that is because it says so. And so today I welcome you, and the three teams that worked diligently this summer are going to give you a presentation of their results. Today it's going to be the Chinese team, Chinese dialect team, and the landmark team, and tomorrow the visual and text combination team. I don't know what to say. We have here present with us a panel. The panel is here to judge the worthiness of proposals for further work. We have money for to finance additional work by graduate students and even undergraduates. Work that was begun at the workshop, and I think at an appropriate time when they will be talking here, they will say that that is the work that they want the panel to consider. The results will be announced at tomorrow's banquet. So, without further ado, I'll give you Richard Sprout, the head of the Chinese team.
Okay. Thank you, Fred. Okay, so this, as many of you may know, is nearly the project that wasn't. There's been various pitfalls along the way. Actually, this was supposed to have taken place last summer. It was postponed because of SARS. And then we had various problems, visa problems and stuff like that. In fact, one of the reasons I'm up here and Thomas Jung is not up here presenting it as the team leader is because of various visa problems. So various things have happened along the way. However, I think what we'll show today is that through the hard work of the team members, we've actually managed to accomplish some things towards our goals. So let's start with the issue. The basic issue is accented speech. Problem in speech. Large numbers of people are moving around. They move to different regions for economic, reasons, or simply because of, they live in a country where there's a standard language and they don't speak that. And so lots and lots of people speak whatever language they speak with a foreign accent. Okay, and so if you're talking about building speech recognition systems, dealing with foreign accents is a critical thing. Arabic and Chinese are a couple of languages which have generated quite a bit of interest for economic and other reasons over the last several years. We're going to be looking at Chinese. The main issue for accent, of course, is that the test, the situation where you're actually recognizing someone with a foreign accent is very different from what you often train your speech recognition system on. And realistically, it's too expensive to train a system to deal with every kind of foreign accent imaginable. What you would like, in principle, is to have something where you could take a system that you've already got and adapt it to a foreign language, to a foreign accent. Okay. With respect to Chinese, the situation is, for political reasons, a little bit different. What we're going to be dealing with in this project is what would be called foreign accent, except in the case of Chinese, you can't call it that, obviously, because the people who are speaking with these accents are all Chinese. Most of China, the thing to bear in mind is that Chinese, as we think of it, standard language, also called Putonghua, the sort of ordinary language, is the language that you'll think of mostly as Chinese, but most people who speak that in China speak it with an accent. Okay, the people who grow up in the Mandarin-speaking region, even many of them will have a regional accent, of course. But it's important to bear in mind that China comprises, or I should say Chinese comprises at least 7 different language groups. So there's Mandarin, which is by far the largest, about 800 million speakers. That's mostly in the northern parts of the country. Yue, which is one of the language groups, includes Cantonese. Min, best known, say, for Taiwanese. Wu, which is the group that we're looking at here, includes Shanghainese. And then there's a couple of sort of 2 or 3 more minor groups, Hakka, Xiang, and Gan. Okay. And all of the speakers of these languages, well, not all of them, but many of the speakers of these languages will speak standard Chinese, but they will speak it with an accent. Okay. So, the goal then is to basically improve recognition of standard Chinese as spoken by people who have a regional accent, whose native language is another language. Okay, and the particular group that we decided to focus on, largely for economic reasons, is Shanghainese, and Shanghainese is one of the Wu languages. Wu has many different languages besides Shanghainese. It's the largest language in China besides Mandarin. It has 81 million speakers. Okay, and again, Shanghai is an economically very important region these days. Okay, now as a language, the Wu languages are quite different from Mandarin. We're not going to really say much about them here, but the basic import of that is that when people with whose native language is one of the Wu languages speak Mandarin, they really often have a very strong accent. Okay. So a little bit more of the demographics of this. So this is the region, basically Zhejiang province is where the Wu dialects are mostly spoken. Shanghai you can see up there. So basically, just to summarize what I've been saying, our project then is to deal with the problem of people who speak in Mandarin with an accent, in particular with people from Shanghai whose native language is not Mandarin. Okay, so let's just give you a sense of this. I'm not sure how clear these examples will be to, just get the mouse here. Okay. What I'm going to play for you is, first of all, the difference between standard Mandarin, Putonghua, and the actual Wu language. So it's a different language, and hopefully you'll be able to, even if you don't speak Chinese, you'll be able to actually hear that these really are different languages. Okay, so let me start with a instance of standard Putonghua. Those of you who do speak Chinese will probably, well, many of you already know this, but I mean, will probably notice that this is a speaker with a Taiwan accent, but nonetheless it is standard Mandarin.
有1200多个学生。
Okay. Now this is actual Shanghainese.
有1200多个。
Okay. Now hopefully that sounded quite different, even if you didn't speak the language. Now what we're actually dealing with is not that, but rather this. Again, the same standard Mandarin speaker, followed by somebody whose native language is not Mandarin, but is speaking, I should say Putonghua, but is speaking Putonghua here. So this is the standard.
华是龙华是怎么带来的，对吧？我看了一篇是常说的，就是啊。
So I got this particular speaker to imitate what the following speaker is actually doing.
龙华是怎么带来的，对吧？但是我看了一篇是常说的，你知道吗？
Now that may be more difficult for you to tell that they're different, but to a native Chinese speaker or anyone who speaks Chinese, you can clearly hear that these are, the second speaker is quite accented. Okay, now let's just go over a little bit some of the previous work that's been done on this, on sort of the general problem of dealing with accented speech. So there are three basic approaches. One is kind of the simplest, is simply to have a corpus of accented speech and to train on it. You can't get much better than that in principle. The second is to do some kind of acoustic model adaptation, and the third is to do some kind of lexicon adaptation or pronunciation modeling. Okay. Now, certainly if you do the first, that is training on a corpus of accented speech, you can do pretty well. So, there's various pieces of work that show, say if you have 20 hours of speech, 20 hours of accented English, say, you can reduce the word error rate substantially over just using native English models for that speech. If you have less speech, you will make less of an improvement, but nonetheless you can still improve if you have enough data in domain, okay, or in accent. Now, more sophisticated approaches use some kind of adaptation, the assumption being that you can't always assume that, say, you have 20 hours of accented speech. So there's been various work on this, in particular, for example, at Microsoft China, they've actually worked on doing dialect adaptation, in particular for Shanghainese, and they've investigated the use of such techniques as MLLR, which is a standard adaptation technique, and have shown that if you use MLLR on the individual test speakers, this is of course an unsupervised method, so it is honest. Then you can get a reduction of error rate, and so on and so forth. So there's various work that's shown that techniques like MLLR can be adapted for this problem. Similarly, MAP, different kind of adaptation, typically done on training data, so it would be a supervised kind of adaptation. Will also get you some gains. So there's been work by Wang et al. On German accented English. German accented what? It's German accented English. If you have a 50 minutes of training data, you can get a fairly substantial reduction in error rate.
I don't know, what did you say, German accent in English?
Yes,
What has that got to do with Chinese?
it's a foreign accent,
I see.
a non-native
And,
accent.
but we chose a Chinese person to have the German accent.
I can't. I believe there was other people on the
Is this supervised or unsupervised?
map. Would be supervised. Okay. So the summary of this is that MLLR and other such techniques are useful. MAP is arguably better than MLLR. If you look at the literature, it seems to suggest that. One of the points is that so people have combined MAP and MLLR for various kinds of techniques, but nobody, to our knowledge, has done this specifically for the problem of adaptation for accent. Okay. So this suggests a couple of things. One is that we might try some more complicated or complex uses of MLLR, and also various techniques for combining MLLR and MAP, and we'll talk about that later in one of the sub-presentations here. Okay, second approach that's familiar to many people is the approach of changing the pronunciation. So the assumption is that you can, people with foreign accents often pronounce words differently for various reasons. We'll see some clear examples of that in our data momentarily. And the idea is, well, okay, so maybe what you want to do is you just want to create a dictionary which has those new pronunciations in it, okay? Simple enough idea. Well, there's been various kinds of approaches to this. One is simply to use handwritten rules, and people have tried that kind of thing. Also to train some kind of rule-based system such as CART. So there's work going back to the late 80s by Riley and others, which shows that if you do this kind of pronunciation modeling, you can get what seem to be fairly substantial gains, okay? Now, what has come to pass, though, is that if you start including techniques like MLLR and map adaptation, the gains that you get from pronunciation modeling or lexicon adaptation seem to largely evaporate, because it seems to be the case that a lot of the stuff that you were learning as part of the pronunciation model is actually handled very well by the kinds of techniques that are used for acoustic modeling. Okay, so it's not that you don't get any gain. In some cases, you can get a 1% word error rate reduction. This again is from work from Microsoft China, where they were looking at Southern Mandarin, so that would include people whose language may be something like Shanghainese, and they showed that if you do this kind of lexicon adaptation, you can get a gain maybe about 1%. But most of the work is being done by the acoustic model adaptation. Now, there's various reasons for this. I mean, the first point I've already said, basically. I mean, most of the gain is already captured by what the acoustic model is already doing, the contextual information and so on and so forth. But there may be another issue here, which is perhaps more interesting, and that is that most of the previous, basically all of the previous work on accent, if you're, say, the work on Chinese accent, has sort of assumed that when you're an accented speaker, well, you're an accented speaker and you just want to be treated the same as every other accented speaker from that particular area. So if you come from Shanghai, well, we'll have a Shanghai model. Well, of course, this is somewhat suspect, and as we'll show momentarily, there's actually a wide variety of things that people, when people apply certain kinds of pronunciation changes, there's a wide variety of differences between how people do that. Okay, so the basic idea then is to, what do we want to do here? So basically, we want to have techniques which can improve recognition for accented speech. Okay, we want to do better acoustic model adaptation. In principle, we'd like to do better lexicon adaptation. We'll be talking about that. One of the main sort of themes here, right, is what I just said on the previous slide, that the notion of accentedness is really a matter of degree. Okay, I mean, somebody can be a very strong accent, very weak accent, people in between. In different circumstances, the same speaker may actually, do different things. If they're reading, they're going to be somewhat different from when they're speaking spontaneously. So one of the things we've been investigating and we'll be reporting on is the issue of detecting accent and using that information, or detecting accentedness and using that information in recognition. Okay. So let me just give a brief overview of where this talk is going, because it's 2.5 hours or something like that, so easy to get lost here. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about the data collection that was done actually last year in 2003. I'll talk about some work that Dan Jurafsky and Rebecca Starr did before the workshop on basically it's kind of a sociolinguistic study of some of these sound changes. I want to talk about some baselines and oracles, and then we're going to talk about pronunciation modeling. We'll talk about the issue of detecting accent automatically, and I will explain then why age comes into this issue, or maybe it'll become clear by then anyway. Then we'll talk about some new models of acoustic adaptation. We'll talk about using the information on accentedness in selecting appropriate acoustic models. And finally, something that kind of came out of this that actually doesn't relate at all to the particular issue of modeling accented speech, but seems kind of an interesting issue for Chinese speech recognition in general, and that is the question of word segmentation and whether there's a particular word segmentation of the input text that will minimize the perplexity of the language model, and we'll give you more details on that later. And then finally, we'll wrap up. Okay, so let's start, talk about the corpus. Okay, so we collected a corpus of speech from people living in Shanghai. They were all of these people were native Shanghai speakers, varying degrees of fluency, varying degrees of standardness in Putonghua. Okay, from each speaker we collected 5 minutes, approximately 5 minutes of spontaneous speech. So what we did, we just sort of sat them down and actually, I guess, Jing here sort of interviewed them, but it was basically, it's really a monologue. You're sort of prompting them for, to talk about certain things. It could be sports, it could be current affairs, it could be, daily life, that kind of thing. And people would just sort of talk spontaneously, so it was, completely spontaneous. We also collected some read speech from each speaker. And so what we ended up with is about 13 hours of broad, wideband speech. So broad got in there. So it's basically 16 kilohertz speech. Okay. We also collected some data from Beijing speakers. This would be just a spontaneous speech, kind of matched for topics. So we basically had people talking about the same kind of thing. Now, we're actually not going to say a lot about the Beijing speakers at all, because we didn't end up really using that data so far. Mentioned the read speech briefly, because we're actually using that in a couple of places. But basically, most of what we're going to be working with, and what you can assume we're talking about most of the time, is this corpus of spontaneous speech, these 5-minute monologues. Okay. So we try to balance. Well, they were completely balanced for gender. Okay, so 25 males, 50% males. Say it again. There are 100 speakers, so there are 50 females and 50 males. Okay, and we try to balance it roughly for age. So we had older speakers, where older means 41 to 50. Okay, so that's the oldest person we had there is 50, and the youngest person we had there was 26. Okay, and we try to balance it for that. Oops, skip one there. We also try to balance it. Well, this doesn't actually show that. It depends where you sort of make the cut between high and low education. But if you consider people through high school as having, say, lower education than people through, say, college or technical schools, then it's actually a little more balanced than this suggests. Okay. Now, one of the things we did is we had the accents of the speakers assessed by professional judges, basically, I guess, of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, where they have a ranking scheme ranging from 1A, which would be a state-level broadcaster quality speech, absolutely perfect standard Putonghua, all the way down to 3B, which is something like, yeah, I can sort of understand it, and it sounds like Putonghua, but that's about all I can say about it. I mean, a very strong accent, basically. Okay, now, as you can see, we didn't have any ones. Okay, so none of these speakers were even, say, state-level quality speakers. We had a few twos, but the largest batch of these was in the 3 range. Okay, so a lot of these people have fairly heavy accents, and a few have extremely heavy accents. Okay, except the one I played you earlier was I don't remember what her rating particularly was, but it was a fairly strong accent. Okay, the data was annotated. Okay, so
excuse me, their syntax is perfect.
I wouldn't say perfect, but
I mean,
okay, I mean, the syntax is the main thing that we've noticed with the syntax of what this of their sentences is that they use certain final particles which are more particular perhaps to the U type style than they are to Mandarin. But there aren't any major obvious differences between this and standard Mandarin, spontaneous Mandarin from that point of view. Okay, so in the data annotation, we transcribed it orthographically. So this is, again, the spontaneous speech. Obviously, for the red speech, they already had the transcription. We transliterated the characters into standard pinyin. That is the standard transliteration system that you would find in a Chinese dictionary that tells you what the canonical pronunciation of this character or this word is, okay, as opposed to what people actually say. Okay, so this is, can be quite different in some cases. And then we did fairly low-level phonetic transcription in terms of these so-called initial finals. So one thing you have to understand about the way most people do Chinese speech recognition, and this actually goes back to a long tradition in Chinese phonology dating back to the, couple of, maybe 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years. And that is the idea that the syllables in Chinese can be divided into two pieces. One is the initial, which would be an initial consonant. Not every syllable has one, but if there is a consonant at the beginning, that would be the initial. And then the final, which is everything else. Okay, so basically, in Mandarin, what that means is the initial is always going to be a single consonant. The final could be a single vowel. It could be a glide followed by a vowel. Or it could be as complex as a glide followed by a vowel followed by nasal. Okay, you don't get more complicated than that in Mandarin. Okay, so because the Chinese syllable structure is relatively simple, at least compared to a language like English, people have found it convenient to actually use IFs or initial finals rather than phones. Okay, so a lot of Chinese speech recognition systems are based on these initial finals. So you'll see this term IF popping up throughout the, yes?
So is the tone then considered to be part of the final?
Yeah, it would be, right. Because that's the tone-bearing unit. That's the, yeah. Okay, and then, so that's the initial finals here. And again, as I said, this was done in fairly, gory detail, people trying to actually notate what was actually said as opposed to what was in the canonical transcription. And then various non-speech events were recorded, coughs and things like that. Okay, so the data annotation was used the Pratt system. No reason to show you that slide other than just show you a pretty picture. Okay, so here's an annotation example. This is actually the same example as we had before, so I won't play it again. But basically, the red text, the red colored text there is the standard pinyin transliteration. And then this text here is the transliteration into this IF scheme. Now, I've actually I realize I made it a little harder here by putting so actually this should be split. This should be a tse here, and then the ang with the tone mark would be a separate thing. My mistake. Anyway, thing to notice here is this person says, so here, this is the standard way of saying this character here, so this would be chang. Okay, but the way this person said it was as tsang, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Okay. So the data were divided into two sets, 80 training speakers and 20 test speakers. The division was based to a large extent on trying to find test speakers who really sort of spanned the space of possible, accentuation. So we had 10 people who were pretty strong accented and 10 people who were pretty weakly accented. I don't know, this is some details on the speakers, maybe I won't bore you with those. So that's basically what I wanted to say about the data annotation. Okay.
Question.
Yeah. Yes.
On the phonetic transcription, is there any dual marking by two labelers to see how much they agree, or?
I don't think so, right? Did you do one labeler, right?
No, several levels.
Oh, it's labeled the same thing?
Yeah, some.
Okay, and then they agree? Or
Yeah, I think there is.
okay. Did we measure the agreement?
Yeah, actually, they had the agreement.
Okay.
Okay, as long as it's there.
It's over 90%.
Okay.
Okay. Right. So I wanted to move on then to some of the work that Dan Jurafsky and Rebecca Starr did. And what they were studying was there's several changes. I mean, there's lots of changes that these speakers will do, and if the stronger the accent, the more pronounced the change will be. But there's some changes which seem to be pretty common to all of the speakers, and in general, some of these are pretty common for any Southern Mandarin speaker, including speakers who are not, say, native speakers of Wu even. So the use this thing, much as I hate these things. Okay. So the change, the sort of three canonical changes that are often associated very strongly with Southern speech are these. So the change from sh to s, okay, the change from ch to ts, and the change from j to z. Okay, those are very common changes. Actually, illustrated down here. So if you take a word like mountain, which is shan, this is going to be pronounced by a lot of Southern speakers as san. Okay, so that's one very distinctive change. So if you hear somebody saying san when they mean shan, you can be pretty sure that they're a Southern speaker. Okay, similarly, you get a case like chan. This word here, cicada, will be pronounced by many people as san. Okay, so you can hear the difference, ch versus ts. And finally, take a word like table, zhuozi. This will be pronounced as zuozi by many people. Okay, so these are very characteristic changes that Southern speakers will do. Okay. There are some others, so ing and in, what you see in pinyin as in, okay, will often be pronounced as ing by Southern speakers. So actually, the word pinyin itself would be often pronounced pinyin with a velar. And then there's other changes like the interchange of n and n. Okay, but these are all pretty characteristic. Now, what Dan and Rebecca did was they examined all of the shuzh in the corpus. Okay, there's over 19,000 of these, and asked the question, when they turned into the what we'll call to say the fronted versions, the suzi, and they correlated this with various features like age, gender, education. And phonetic context. Okay, and they found some interesting things. First of all, there's a massive variation among speakers. In fact, if you look at this graph, what this is showing is for a given speaker, the percentage of use of the standard for these fricatives and affricates. And over here is the number of speakers in that bin. Okay, so you can see there are speakers who don't use any of the standard things, so everything becomes su, tzu, tzu, okay? And there are speakers over here which are pretty standard, and everything is as it should be, as it should be in the canonical case. And there's a whole range of people in between. In fact, the only thing that seems not to be represented are people who have 70% for whatever reason. Okay, presumably there's no significance for that. Now, the other thing that was clear is that younger speakers tend to be more standard. Okay. So people in the 25 to 26-year-old range tend to have a high degree of standardness. People who are in their late 40s tend to be much less standard. Okay, and this probably correlates with the fact that the older speakers tend to be less well educated in China than the younger speakers, and there's certainly a correlation there. There's also you can also show a correlation with education level. Okay.
Is that a general property of many languages in the world, or is this that the younger features tend to be more standard and unique to China?
I suspect it's probably true in many parts of the world. Whether it's
so, is it more so in China than it is in other parts?
Well, I think it's heavily so in China for historical reasons. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that people in their 40s and 50s grew up in a very different kind of society from people who were in their 20s and 30s. So that's clearly had a very strong effect. But I suspect that this kind of thing has happened in many parts of the world.
Does that almost say that the problem is going away?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, there's a bigger question. Is the problem of accentedness going away in general? I don't know. I mean, the problem is certainly changing. Yes.
Yeah.
Probably we should remember that even though there are people who have this 100% score, none of them is better than a 2A or...
Right, no.
Yeah.
So there's more to accentedness than just these features. These are very distinctive features of accentedness, but they're not the only ones.
In fact, the 100% is probably some kind of hypercorrection Or
No, I don't think so. This probably was because this was based on the ones which should be sure. We weren't This didn't include the ones that were sir and should have been sure.
so for those speakers, if you went and looked at what they were doing to their sirs, maybe. they
Oh,
might
yeah, I
not
don't
sure.
know actually. No, oh, Dan says no. Okay, so no. The answer is no then.
So are people very consistent with their usage?
No, people can vary quite a bit within, even within the same sentence. And people do self-correction if they notice it. People are more conscious when they're reading, of course. I mean, people are quite inconsistent even among themselves. Okay. Okay, so, but, there's a sort of a general theme here, and that is that the more s's you have, the more accented you are, and the more sh's you have, the more standard you are. And that seems to be a rough correlation. But, of course, there is much more to it than that, but that's a pretty good... This is kind of a litmus test, or one of the litmus tests that you can use. Okay. So, what do we conclude from this? So, clearly, I mean, that plot that I showed you a couple of slides ago that showed that there was this wide range of variation among different speakers and how much they do these changes suggests that the notion of saying, that, okay, these people are from Shanghai, their native language is Wu, so therefore, they speak with a Shanghai accent, isn't quite going to cut it. I mean, clearly there's more to it than that. I mean, you have to model this in some, minimally you'd at least have to have two groups, one heavily accented, one less heavily accented, and we will be talking about that kind of approach. But ideally, what we think and what we'd like to propose for the future is that people look at, we look into techniques for actually doing this in terms of, say, continuous models of accent variation. Okay, so we'll talk about that more. Age and education, well, I showed you education, but I showed you age, but I indicated that this was also true for education, or is correlated with that. Features like detecting the age of a speaker could, in principle, be used as kind of a secondary way of predicting accentedness. And, given the facts about S and SH, one could envision techniques where you simply do a count of how many S's and how many SH's you have in a given speaker's inventory and make a guesstimate as to whether they are an accented or unaccented speaker. And we'll show you that this technique, simple though it is, actually works quite well. We'll show you that later on. And then finally, you can imagine various kinds of lexical adaptation modeling for this kind of stuff. Let me talk now a little bit about some of the baselines, just to give you a sense of, well, first of all, how bad it is to simply take a standard Mandarin recognizer and apply it to these data. And then how well we can do if we just, say, train on the data that we have. And you'll see there's a substantial difference. But the point being that, there's clearly a lot of work to be done still. So we tried two acoustic models. One was simply the Mandarin Broadcast News acoustic models that had already been built here at Hopkins, and then basically applied to our data. And the other was the what we call the UDEV train, basically the training data, the 6.3 hours of training data that we have. Now, let me, before I say anything about the acoustic models, let me just say something about language modeling. With the exception of one of the things we'll talk about later, this notion of the minimal complexity word segmentation and its relevance for language modeling. We aren't really going to be saying much about language modeling because it wasn't a major focus of this research. As Fred asked earlier, is there a significant difference in the syntax of these speakers from those of people who are, say, more native Putonghua speakers? And the answer is really no. There's not a lot of major differences. And certainly nothing that seemed worth investing the time on language modeling for that purpose. So, fortunately, since we're dealing with language modeling, you don't have to worry about things like microphones and whether it's wideband or not. So we could just use any transcriptions of conversational Mandarin. And so we had a bunch of stuff. We had the Mandarin Hub 5, which is 200 telephone conversations. We had a new corpus from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology of 100 hours of conversational Putonghua. And then we had our own transcriptions. Okay. So this added up to something, I don't remember the numbers, it's like 1 million characters roughly of text. Okay, so it's not a big corpus, and that's actually an issue. I mean, we have a small amount of training data. The dictionary that we started, the baseline dictionary, is a dictionary that has been used for a number of purposes. It was developed actually at Tsinghua University, and it's been used here, for example, for Mandarin broadcast news recognition. I don't want to give you the impression, so we have 50,000 words in the dictionary, but in the language model training data, when you actually see what's the words that are actually found there, it's something like 13,000. So it's actually, think of this as a 50,000 potential words, but actually only about 13,000 are actually used. Okay. The data were prepared by segmenting the text with a simple maximal matching algorithm with a dictionary. For those of you who don't already know what that is, we'll describe that later on. Basically, it's just a segmentation of the text into words, and then a word bigram model was built using the AT&T language modeling tools. Okay. Now, for acoustic modeling, say a little bit more about that. The two baselines that, as I said before, the Mandarin Broadcast News and our own training data. Mandarin Broadcast News has a nice feature that it's, well, like our data, it's wideband. Okay, and there's a fair amount of it, 30 hours or something like that. Downside is it's mostly professional speakers, okay? In fact, mostly read speech because they're newscasters reading texts, and therefore is highly inappropriate really for the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. Most of these people don't have accents. I mean, they presumably are either 1As or 1Bs, mostly 1As, I guess, on that scale, since they're professional newscasters. And because it isn't conversational, they don't have the kinds of phonetic reductions that happen all over the place in spontaneous speech. Okay, so this is a large set of data, and it's appropriate for our purposes, but not very applicable really. The second set we have is our own data. So as I said, we have 6.3 hours of that. It is they are wideband recordings. Obviously, there's what we collected ourselves, and they have the nice feature that they're in domain, but there isn't very much of it. Now, one thing we did toy around with and didn't really quite get to work, so we kind of dropped it, was the idea of taking the telephone corpus, the telephone speech, of which we had a fair amount, like Hub5 data, and downsampling our own speech to telephone bandwidth, and then doing various manipulations and using that. But that didn't seem to actually gain us anything, so we sort of kind of dropped that line. The acoustic models are fairly standard, nothing particularly to say about that. We hit upon 14 Gaussian mixes models per state as being seemed to be a good compromise between the score and having things too high. I mean, basically it seemed to be a reasonable size. We use this, as far as the decoding, we use this kind of mix of HDK and the AT&T tools. So basically, the HDK acoustic models were converted into AT&T Blazor format for use in the AT&T DRECOG decoder. And here are the results. Okay. So for the Mandarin Broadcast News, we get a 61% character error rate. Why character error rate? Well, in Chinese speech recognition, people typically report the scores in terms of characters rather than words. Because if nothing else, characters are what one can agree on. There's the issue of what constitutes the words in Chinese is highly contentious. So everybody can agree on characters. I mean, what's there in the text, so people report things in terms of character error rate. So you'll see CER, character error rate, appearing throughout this talk. Okay. So Mandarin Broadcast News gives you a 61% character error rate, so it's getting 2 out of every 3 words wrong. You can do it substantially better if you just use our training data, which is kind of nice.
I have a question.
Yes.
When a word is agreed to be 2 characters, let's say.
Yes.
Does it ever happen that you make an error in one but not in the other?
Yeah. Sure.
I see.
Yeah.
And the other one is
Well, I mean, it could-
gotten correctly by coincidence?
Could be. Yeah. Entirely possible.
So
I mean, if nothing else, there are 2 words which may share the same initial character, be sufficiently similar in pronunciation that you get the 2 confused. Okay. So these are the baselines, and you should sort of remember these numbers. And these numbers will come, pop up from time to time. But these are the baselines. If you use the out-of-domain data, you get about 61% error rate. If you use in-domain data, you use substantially better. Presumably, if we had even more, if we had 20 hours, 30 hours of our own data, we'd get even lower, but we don't. We have 6.3 hours. Okay. The second thing I wanted to talk about before turning this over to the next speaker is one question we wanted to investigate is how much gain one could expect to get out of pronunciation modeling, lexicon adaptation. And the way we did this was using an oracle. So imagine that you were prescient and you knew exactly which pronunciations a speaker was going to use, or at least how, take their most common pronunciation and say, okay, I'm going to use that in my dictionary. Okay. Now, obviously, you could never hope for that. Nobody's that prescient. However, that would give you sort of kind of a top line of what you might expect to be able to do by any kind of pronunciation modeling technique. Okay. So the way we actually did this was to, well, this isn't quite a full oracle. So basically, I sort of concentrated on the changes that we've already seen in previous slides, which are really kind of the most characteristic, the most common for these speakers. So this is the fricative affricate changes, the fronting that we talked about extensively before, and then this one change involving the ing substitution. Now, as I say, those are not all of the changes by any means that speakers will do, and there's all kinds of reductions due to conversational speech, deletions, things which have nothing particularly to do with accent, none of which is modeled here. But these are pretty, just modeling these covers a large percentage of the things that you see when you look at these data. So this is a fairly good start. It gives you a pretty good idea. So what we did is I basically took the dictionary. We allowed these alternative pronunciations. We forced to line that dictionary. Yes, Anders.
Do these systematic phonological changes have any effect on confusability of lexical items?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yeah, I mean, if you take the word Shan, mountain, and you say San, that's immediately confusable with the number 3, which is San. I mean, so yes, I mean, quite a bit of confusion. What we did was we took a dictionary, expanded it, we allowed these pronunciations optionally, forced aligned that dictionary using standard forced alignment techniques with the speech of each test speaker, got which pronunciation. Actually, we took the single best pronunciation that the acoustic model really liked for that speaker, okay, and stuck it in our dictionary and said, okay, that's going to be our oracle dictionary for that speaker. And I won't bore you with the numbers here. Basically, it helped in most cases. For some obscure reason, Dan thinks it's a bug. It hurt in one case, but and there was a couple of cases where it made no difference. But yeah, just once, yeah.
Sorry, did you remove the other pronunciations?
No. No.
Sorry?
Optional change.
So it was an additional.
Yes.
An additional.
Yeah, all of the possible pronunciations were there with or without these sound changes, and we simply let the acoustic model decide which one it liked. Okay.
And you didn't then retrain the acoustic models?
No, we did not.
Okay, so you take this person's speech and you retranscribe. Is that right? And then when you say forced align, you find which pronunciation?
No, it's not. This isn't based on the transcription. This is based on purely.
So what does forced align mean?
Yes, forced align means you take the sentence, you expand the pronunciations of those words to allow these alternatives. You run it as a recognizer, except that it's only allowed to choose those words in that sequence. Okay.
Which words?
The word. So the person said. The person said a given sentence. Okay.
Yes.
You have a sequence of words. To force align it means simply to take those words as the language model, right? Very good language model.
That means you have it transcribed.
This is on the test data. So this is in some sense cheating.
It is cheating. Oh, it's in every sense
you
cheating.
know what the words are
Yes.
ahead of time.
Yes.
That's why it's forced align.
You said before you didn't transcribe, and I think you did. It was transcribed. So it was transcribed.
Not phonetically transcribed.
I'm not sure which. I thought Fred meant.
Politically, I'm discussing the text of what was.
Oh, you mean orthographic transcription? Yes. Yes.
So it was orthographically
Yes.
transcribed, and
Yes.
you decided, therefore, which word was pronounced how.
Right.
Okay. And now, once we decided it, that's the pronunciation.
The recognizer decided how it was pronounced.
Right.
We got it.
No, this addresses the question of whether the acoustic models were retrained.
No, but I want to get to a point, all right? So with this, so for those words, these pronunciation that we decided upon will be added. Is that right?
Well, actually, in this case, substituted because
Substituted. In other words, that word can't have any other pronunciation.
correct.
Now, what about the words which were not spoken? That
Left
compete?
alone, left alone.
All right, so this is a little flaky, right? Because just because I pronounce this one in a certain way, I will probably pronounce some other one in another way, and
Right.
they will compete.
Correct.
But you don't do this
Right.
other substitution.
Yeah, it's-
So I don't know quite what we should conclude from that.
Well, I mean, presumably it's flaky in several senses, right? But I mean, the point is that you are getting the pronunciation for the words. You're weighting it heavily in favor of this really giving you a big gain.
Yes, yes, yes.
That's the point.
Right.
That's exactly the point.
Did you do another experiment in which you tried to derive this kind of statistics from training data? Like force aligning the training?
Yeah, we actually have done those kinds of things, but we're not going to report on that specifically here. But we have played around.
In other words, it's much better than even if you knew the person's.
Yes, it's much better, but we get a 1.4%
but
gain.
Hold on.
Okay.
It's not necessarily much better, because suppose you found that the person says tree instead of mountain, so you stick in the pronunciation for
Right.
tree where the word is mountain.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you'll start misrecognizing trees, won't you?
Yes.
So in some sense, this is not really the meaning. This
Well,
is
I
the
mean,
limitation for
okay,
dictionary.
hold on. If you do that substitute, I mean, let's say this were the way Chinese was, and everybody said san when they meant shan, okay? Then you'd have two things in your dictionary, and then you'd always be misrecognizing threes anyway, right? I mean, that's life. I mean, that's just the way it would be.
No, I guess Fred's point is that they may now be pronouncing tree differently. In
Uh,
order to distinguish
well, in
from
theory,
the
they,
language.
Exactly.
in theory they might. In fact, they wouldn't be. So look, this is not intended to be. I mean, this is an oracle, right? This is a technique that's intended to weight the system in favor of if you knew the pronunciation. Now, how well could you? And it's sort of really stacked in favor of getting good gains. But with all of that, you get 1.4%. Okay, and that's really the bottom line. It doesn't gain you that much, apparently.
Sorry, I don't want to belabor the point, but what if a single speaker pronounced a single word multiple different ways?
You just pick. Oh well, you mean every time they say it differently?
Yeah, because what I understand what you're getting is you're trying to get at a light speed measure, like how good can you do? What's the maximum improvement you can get? But I think also what Fred was saying is that this is not light speed because a single speaker can pronounce a given word in multiple different ways.
Well, in principle, but in fact, they typically pronounce it maybe in one or two ways.
But if it's two, then and if it's say 49 and 51%,
Well, then you get the 51%, and yeah, you lose the 49.
Right.
But let me just point out that if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that the Cambridge people have found is that the best way to do to sort of adapt their dictionary is to simply force a line on their training data and pick the single best pronunciation.
Yeah, but only when you retrain them all.
Well, then you retrain them all. Yeah, okay, fine. But I mean, so we're not doing that one step. But
that's the crucial step.
well, you would expect to get better than this if I retrain them all?
Well, one reason to do this kind of thing is you can narrow, maybe not for these particular distinctions because they're neutralization, but in other cases, it's because you can narrow the variance of your gas.
Yeah, I understand that. But I mean, in this particular case, would you expect retraining the acoustic models?
Because you don't have enough data.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the problem.
I'm sorry, this is a slightly different question. Is it possible to distinguish the mountain from tree when spoken by Wu speakers?
You mean in isolation?
Sorry?
In isolation.
In isolation, yeah.
Well, if they're strong enough, then they just completely neutralize. No, I mean, I guess it's.
I'm asking, is the neutralization complete?
It can be.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't always complete, but it can be complete. Yes. I should, end this note because we need to move along. Basically, so what this suggests is that modulo the caveats that have been raised. I mean, these are all well taken, but I mean, I think the point is that at the end of the day, it's going to be hard. In principle, it seems as if it might be hard to show a huge amount of gain from just doing these lexicon manipulations. But perhaps there are some more sophisticated methods that could be used. And with that, I will turn it over to Thomas.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I present experiments for the pronunciation modeling, and because my English is not so good, so sometimes maybe I speak slow. So I try to make it clear. Okay. Actually, the project goal, as proposed, is that we want to develop a general framework to model the phonetic variability, pronunciation variability, and lexicon variability in dialectal Chinese tasks. And this, I think, Richard has also mentioned that. And we want to try to find a suitable method to modify Putonghua recognizer. Putonghua means standard Chinese recognizer, so as to obtain a dialectal Chinese recognizer for specific dialect of interest. We will use here is dialect-related knowledge and training data. The training data should be in relatively small quantities or even no training data. So this is original goal we proposed. And our expectation here is that the recognizer should also work for Putonghua after this improvement. In other words, it should be good for a mixture of Putonghua and dialect Chinese. Why this goal? Because sometimes one speaker, a Wu speaker, speaks Putonghua. Sometimes it may pronounce correctly, but sometimes it may pronounce incorrectly. So this is the situation. This is the case. So we try to expect that the recognizer good for both situations. So we try to find some effect from the Wu dialectal Chinese data, and we found that there are some initial final mapping or syllable mapping. So let me say a few words about the mapping. Here we, because influenced by Wu dialect, Wu dialectal Chinese speaker often pronounce any of a certain set of initial final sets into another initial final, just as Richard has said, zi to zhi, zhi to zi, chi to ci, or shi to ci, and so on. Actually, there are several such pairs for Wu dialect. And we try to observe the difference among three different sets. The three different sets is one is a train set consisting of 80 speakers. And the DEV test. DEV test is a subset of this train set. We just taking it out for first experiment using less data for to reach our goal. And the test set is 20 speakers. So, and we found that three interesting phenomena that the mapping pairs are almost the same among three different sets of different size. And the mapping pairs are almost identical to experts' knowledge. And also the mapping probability is also almost equal among the three different sets. So we think that the experts' knowledge could be useful in further experiment, and the mapping rules can be learned from less data. So this is the basis for our further experiment, why we use less data to do this job. So this is our workshop experiment. We were trying a totally different experiment. We use HTK, which is the latest version downloadable from a web page. And we use only 20 speakers data plus dialect-based knowledge. Here are several steps in our experiment. First, we want to apply the Putonghua initial final mapping rules. And the second, we apply Wu dialectal Chinese initial final mapping rules. And third, we apply syllable-dependent mapping rules. And fourth, we perform multi-pronunciation expansion based on unique-word probability. And finally, we would like to perform a rank-based acoustic model with scoring. And now we give some details for these 5 steps. And before say something about the detailed steps, I would like to give an explanation. why we tried this method. First, I think initial final mapping in dialect Chinese is a fact. And when human try to understand the Wu dialectal speaker speak in Putonghua, actually use this kind of knowledge. When he hear, for example, 知识 in Chinese, it is knowledge in English, and he can understand it is 知识. 知识 is Putonghua pronunciation, and 知识 is Wu dialectal pronunciation. So actually, the human use this knowledge to recognize what Wu dialectal speaker said. And in domain data training, this is an assumption that we should get a good result, but actually collecting the data will be a big effort. Especially for Chinese, we have about 40 sub-dialects. So it's a quite large number of dialects in Chinese. So if you collect data for each dialect, it's a very big effort. And third, we think that we can use adaptation method to get a good recognizer for a specific dialect of interest. But actually, I think it also brings some problem. For example, 知 could be pronounced as 知 and 知 could be pronounced as 知. So two different initial finals map into one. And after adaptation, each pair tends to be a single initial final. And when a Putonghua speaker wants to use this recognizer, it cannot distinguish such a difference. So that's a problem. So we want to try something different. We not just use the adaptation method. And if in this case, it is actually not practical, in such applications as call centers, for example, you place a call center in the airport of Shanghai city, and we will meet such a situation. And our expression is here. I just mentioned about that. So okay, let's go step by step. The first step we did is that to apply Putonghua initial final mapping rules. The rules are based on expert knowledge. We do not do any accident model adaptation. So here are the mappings. Richard mentioned about this, and this one. Actually, we have some other one, including Ing to Ing and R to L. So these are very common in Wu dialectal Chinese. And also we have some other pairs. It's a reverse direction. For some more accented speakers, they may some pronounce 知 into 知. It is quite different. Quite different. We call it over standardization. It's very interesting. But actually, for more accent, more standard speakers, we feel we seldom find such a phenomenon. And the result is here. The gain is not so significant. We get only 0.5% character error rate reduction. And we have also did some experiment on comparing the pronunciation entrant probability. But we found that the probability does not help improve the performance. So finally, we just use equal probability for each word entrant in the vocabulary. The second step that we want to apply Wu dialectal initial final mapping rules. So the difference between the Putonghua initial final mapping rules is that there are some Wu dialectal specific initial finals. So these initial finals cannot be seen in Putonghua. For example, IAO Yao it will be mapped into IO as this symbol. We have to model such newly introduced initial finals. So actually the rules are learned from the DEV test, I mean the 20 speakers data. And the newly introduced Wu dialectal-specific initial findings are trained from the DV test also. We used the adaptation method to get this acoustic model. And finally, we get about 9% absolute character error rate reduction. So it is very big compared with Putonghua initial final mapping rules. And we also compared some method for the adaptation. One is MAR, another is MAR plus MAP. And we found that this is not, this is better and this is not so good as expected. I think the reason may be because of the less data. We use only 20 speakers data. And the difference between the two methods is about 10% difference. So it's very big for our test.
Question.
Yes.
In this experiment, did you change the dictionary and then adapt the acoustic model?
No, dictionary is the same.
I see. So here you did not change the dictionary.
We did not change the dictionary.
Okay.
So other dictionary is totally the same.
Okay.
We just add some pronunciation, multiple pronunciation.
Well, that's what I mean by changing the dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
So you did change.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also performed acoustic model adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
So this improvement that you got is due to the combined effect of both.
Yeah, the combination of the two things.
Okay.
But finally, later I will give a curve and you can see the difference. Okay.
You mean you did break it down? You have other experiments that show the effect of just changing the dictionary versus...
The experiment I will show later is that you did the expansion and you do not do the expansion, and you can get a true result. You can see the difference. Yes?
Yeah, that was my question. In step one, you didn't do any acoustic adaptation, right?
Right.
The similar adaptation, was it single class, multi-class? Can you be more specific? Can you be more specific about the MLLR adaptation? Was it single class MLLR, multi-class MLLR? How detailed was it? How specific was it? Interclass MLLR, what kind of MLLR?
We just actually we use the same method as used in some others. So no special. No, we use HDK. Yeah.
Is it global or is it multiple regression class?
Global and then use the regression tree. So yeah, very common method.
So do you use a regression tree?
Yeah.
Tree for multiple regression classes.
Yeah. So the third step is that we want to apply syllable-dependent mapping rules. The assumption here is that most initial final mappings are context independent, but some are syllable-dependent, such as shi. Actually, shi, if you pronounce it as si, it is content dependent, because both initial and final will change simultaneously. We cannot only change initial or only change the final. They should be simultaneously. And we believe that there are some other such initial final mappings. And so we try to learn such mappings from the data. But unfortunately, we do not succeed in improving the accuracy. On the contrary, the character error rate reduced by about 6%. So till now, we do not have a clear explanation, but we will continue to investigate this result after we are back to China.
Well, one thing I can think of is that many of these mappings are fricative to fricative mappings. And the recognizers don't respond well to any changes you make in fricatives. So if you change the dictionary and just change pronunciations of words only in the fricative regions, then you will not see a significant improvement in performance, no matter how hard you work on it or how many pronunciations you change. I was just trying to suggest a positive, some kind of an explanation, you know, for this phenomenon.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your question.
Okay, so the mappings you're suggesting, I cannot pronounce these. These are all high frequency fricatives, fricative sounds, and the recognizers inherently do not perform well on fricative sounds. It's, you know, the cues are mostly taken from the vowels. So most of the changes that you are making here are fricative to fricative changes.
Frequently.
Fricative.
Fricative. Never mind.
So I think what she's basically trying to say is that many of the cues that you think are in the fricative are actually in the final component, and that they're quite subtle, that you actually have to adapt both the final and the initial parts together.
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to, is that your point basically?
You know, maybe we'll take it up later. There's a list of mappings initially that you read out. I'm sorry.
Z to Z,
Yeah.
Z to
They're
Z to
mostly
Z.
high frequency phonemes.
Yes.
Yeah, and your accents differ in mostly these high frequency components. So trying to fix those accents by changing the dictionary, in the sense you change only those high frequency phonemes, is not going to lead to a significant improvement in recognition.
But it's my impression, the point of this slide is that you're actually changing more than just the initial fricative there. You're changing the rest of the syllable.
No,
Right.
actually.
That's why acoustic adaptation would work better than changing just the dictionary pronunciations.
Actually, you mean
This
the
could
last
be a
step?
possible explanation. I'm
But
not
actually,
saying that-
it's a combination of the adaptation and the mapping rules combination. And actually, I will show you later in another slide that you can see the mapping rules do have some effect.
Right.
Have you looked at the kinds of changes in the triphone inventory that you get by performing these lexicon modifications? Because when you just replace a single phone, right, you're actually possibly generating a triphone that hasn't been seen in training.
You're right.
And do you know whether this could be a problem? I mean, you can just look at the frequency of your triphones, you know, whether the newly created ones actually are well covered in your training data, although, of course, you didn't have this change in the training data. Do you know whether that's the case or not? Because if that was not the case, you might do worse just because the new triphones that you want to use for your changed dictionary would be poorly trained.
I see. Maybe we can, yeah. We didn't have a look at the triphone. We just changed the, in the lexicon level. So, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Fine.
Because we have only about 1,000 sentences to do this experiments, and we try the context. We want to extract the initial final mapping rules from the 1,000 sentences, and is focused on the context of re-initial final mapping and the syllable-dependent initial final mapping. I think the word-dependent, the syllable-dependent initial final mapping is same as the left context or right context dependent initial final mapping. If we want to do the tri-if mapping, I think maybe we have enough data. Because we have only 1,000 sentences transcriptions to do this.
But you have your training corpus, right? Your Mandarin broadcast news training corpus, which is where you get your acoustic models from. Do I understand correctly?
I think it's different for Mandarin broadcast news and the Wu dialected Chinese data. Different.
Well, my understanding was that you trained your acoustic model on Mandarin broadcast news.
Yes.
And then you're doing some changes to the dictionary, possibly acoustic adaptation, and then you test on the Wu dialect data, right?
Yes.
So, but you know what the training transcripts are for the broadcast news data.
Mm.
So you know, or should be able to know, with what frequency various initial final triphones, combinations, triplets occur in the acoustic training data. So you can simply look up whether the newly created triplets of initial finals are covered in your acoustic training data.
Mm-hmm.
Or they probably would be less covered because it's a dialect.
You would think so. So that's a potential problem.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe we can do that later. Okay.
On this slide, what is the 6% reduction relative to? Is that relative to the improved performance that you had at the end of step 2?
Yes.
Okay, so you're still about 2% better than the baseline from step 1.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more. So it's not that this by itself made an absolute reduction in performance. It's that it canceled out most of the improvement that you had in step 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
We ought to limit the debate here. We need to move on. So, I mean, there is a lunch hour, and no. We have some of us have a scheduled lunch hour, so we want to get to it. And those of you who are interested in this subject can devote your lunch hour to it. So let's just go forward.
So the first step that we, just as John said, we ignore the step 3 and we do the multi-pronunciation expansion based on unigram probability. The motivation here is that more pronunciations help to model pronunciation variations, but also lead to more confusion. So there should be some trade-off. And we use accumulated unigram probability as criterion. Only words with higher unigram probabilities will have multiple pronunciation each, and words with lower unigram probabilities will have a single standard pronunciation each. So here is a figure. You can understand how we choose which use a multi-pronunciation, which is single. So we sorted the word in terms of probability according in the descending order, like this, and we accumulate the probabilities like this. And if we want to cover about 90% of word frequencies, we get this area. So this is a unigram probability, and we can choose to from this as a boundary or this as a boundary. And then if the unigram probability is bigger or equal than this one, then we do the multi-pronunciation expansion. Otherwise, we just use a single pronunciation. That is to use a standard Putonghua pronunciation. So this is how we choose. And here is the result. Here's the result. Actually, 0 means no pronunciation expansion, and 100 means fully expansion. So I can see that if we do not do the expansion, and the error rate is very big. And if we fully do the expansion, and the error rate also big. But if we gradually expand the lexicon according to the probability, and you can see that it will go down and to a lowest point and then up. So I think from this figure maybe we can explain just now gentleman asked, the question he just asked. So we can see that if we do not do expansion, it's bad, and we do full expansion, it is also bad. So we just found a good point that we can achieve a highest accuracy. So from this we can find that the ratio is vocabulary size ratio, means actual vocabulary size to the standard vocabulary size, and ratio is about 1.24. So this is the result. And for the fifth step, we would like to do rank-back acoustic model with scoring. The assumption here is that ranks in the lattice, when using the recognizer derived from the Putonghua recognizer to recognize the Wu dialectal Chinese speech, has a relatively stable distribution. This is the assumption. So we first generate a lattice like this. And on each arc there is an initial final, I mean the canonical initial final. And then we turn it into a multi-alignment format like this. So this correspond to initial final, and this another one, and so on. And then we try to learn such a probability from this and the transcription. This is a canonical transcription, and this result is lattice. And we compare them and get such a probability. This probability is called a probability of A. A is the initial final. If seen in the ranked position in this lattice. But I'm sorry to say that this work has not been finished. Because there isn't any existing ways to do this experiment, so we would like to continue this work later. And this is the overall performance comparison. So here is a baseline, and here is a Putonghua using Putonghua mapping, and here is using Wu dialectal Chinese mapping. And this is do the multi-pronunciation expansion. And we can find that it can, the character error rate can goes down, and the difference is about 10%, over 10% error rate reduction. And we also try to look into the result according to the different speaker clusters, and we found that for low education groups, and the improvement is the biggest, and it is about 20% error reduction. So, and here, I think maybe we have some questions about this. We short conclusion that we obtain a Wu dialectal Chinese recognizer from Putonghua recognizer, and we can get error reduction of 10%. And the question is, how about using it to recognize Putonghua? Just use a newly created recognizer. So we can look at this figure. If we just use adaptation method, this is a conventional method, we can see that the sh and the s will gradually change into a single initial final. But we try a different way. We do not do such adaptation. Sh still into sh, but maybe with some variation, because sh in Wu dialectal Chinese may be different from sh in Putonghua. So but we use rules here and some other adaptation method here. So we expect that this can be good for Putonghua speech. So this is our expectation. And the result is here. Using a Wu dialectal Chinese recognition, we can, actually the performance does not reduce very much, only 0.06%. So here's a brief summary. The use of knowledge is useful and effective. But I would like to give some words about this experiment in the summer. Actually, in our experiment, there are several factors involved. The channel, the speaking style, the dialect background, and the domain. We can ignore domain because it will be handled by the language model. But for the first three characters, we only focus on the dialect background. But if you use the adaptation method or adaptation-related method, you can easily cover channel, speaking style, and dialect background. So I hope that if we focus also on the channel and the speaking style factors, we can get more gain totally. So, and another thing I want to mention is that the proposed method needs much more efforts in programming and data preparation for each step because there are not existing tools to use. This leads to very low efficiency. And we choose to use HTK because we can continue to do the research in post-workshop experiments because AT&T tools is hard to get the license after we come back to China, so we choose to use HTK. And our future work include two parts. One is we will continue on the current project, including investigating the syllable-dependent mapping. And the second is rank-based rescoring. And the next is language model adaptation. We can see from some phenomena that there are 2 points. One is there are different word forms with the same meaning among Putonghua and Wu dialect Chinese, such as English like, and in Putonghua 喜欢, and in Wu dialect Chinese 欢喜. Cook and Putonghua is 做饭, but in Wu dialect Chinese 烧饭. So the same meaning but a different word form. For Putonghua speaker, he will never say this way, but he can understand. So that's the case. And the linguist says that the vocabulary similarity rate between Putonghua and Wu dialect is about 60 to 70%. So that is to say there are about 40 to 30% difference. So there is room for us to do language model adaptation. And another one is a different word order. For example, you go first. In Putonghua, we say you first go. Maybe it seems strange for English word order, but actually it's normal in Putonghua. And in Wu dialect Chinese, they said, 你走先, you go first. So a different word order. And this kind of phenomenon also exists in Wu dialect Chinese.
Excuse me, they write it differently also, is that right? They write it differently.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we would like to focus on the language model adaptation later. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about...
Excuse me, is this a proposal for all?
Yes, this is a proposal. Okay. I'm David Kirsch. This is my proposal for more research. I'm proposing an approach for unsupervised continuous lexicon adaptation for pronunciation model. So first I'm going to just briefly revisit what the pronunciation lexicon is. We have a list of words with their pronunciations that we believe they're observed or we know about the language. And this can either be a single pronunciation for each word that's most likely, or a list of multiple pronunciations that are likely. So some words could have a different number of pronunciations that are over some threshold of likelihood. Usually, in many tasks, we find it's better to use only the single pronunciation lexicon. Sometimes we use log normalized probabilities if we're going to have multiple pronunciations. So what this does is to keep track of your likely pronunciations. And the problem that we deal with is that the static lexicon is bad for accented speakers. This is particularly true if you're going to only have the single most likely pronunciation, because it's the seldomly spoken pronunciations that are likely to be used by an accented speaker. So if you can tell what accent someone has, you would like to adapt to that. So past approaches that have been tried for this, and we have tried forms of all of these during the workshop, and they've been tried for other languages and sometimes also for accented Chinese in the past, are to train on your speaker, if you can. If you have some hand transcribed data from the speaker that you're trying to interpret, you can simply train on that part of the data and use the model you build there to translate the rest of what they say. You can hand construct pronunciation rules if you have a lot of knowledge about how the accent works, or you can try to cluster the speakers automatically or by hand into accent categories. So the problems here are that for most speech recognition tasks, it's impractical or impossible to train on the speaker. You simply don't have annotated data in an applied situation. The pronunciation rules require expert domain knowledge and also have the same problem as clustered speakers, which I'll talk about in a moment, that accentedness is continuous, not a discrete variable. So as Richard discussed in the beginning of the talk, there's a very wide spectrum of what it means to have an accent. You can fully employ all of the accent change rules, or you can use them sometimes. Some people hypercorrect and do the opposite transformation because they know what is unusual about their speech. So I'm proposing a new approach here, and the criteria in selecting this approach are that it should have continuously adaptable models to deal with the continuous nature of accent. It should have continuously classified speakers so that you can use these models. And it should be able to adapt to new speakers without supervision so that it can be practical for real applications. So the ways I'm proposing to fill these needs are that the continuous speaker classification can be done through detection of phoneme ratios. So before we were talking about the use of phonemes such as sh versus s and j versus z. So by detecting the ratios of these phonemes, we have what is already a continuous variable for accent. The continuous speaker models then are going to require us to reweight our pronunciation lexicon based on our classification, and I will talk about that next. So just a brief review of the phoneme substitution. We have these rules that some Wu accented speakers will pronounce a word that is in standard for Tanhua on the left, using a pronunciation on the right for their accent. This is a very important aspect of Wu accented speech, and it's been shown that it's very closely tied to other aspects of Wu accented speech. It's easily observable, and it's already a continuous distribution, so it's very suitable to the task I've described. So we can't directly determine how often somebody is making this substitution in a test speaker because we don't know what words they were trying to say initially. Our goal is to find out what they were trying to say, so we don't know what the standard pronunciation would have been. So we don't know when a s they say should have been a sh and when it should have been a s. But what we can detect are the ratio of these sh's to the s's. And for now, I'm going to be just talking about that particular phoneme pair, but it's analogous to what we can do with all substitutions. So by taking this ratio, we get a continuous distribution from 0 to theoretically infinity of our speakers' use of this of these phoneme types. And you see that in the middle somewhere, the value for our training set was 1.39. We have the ratio for a standard speaker. A strongly accented speaker would have something closer to 0. I think 10% of our speakers actually were 0. And further out, you have a higher ratio for speakers who are over-standardizing. And the most extreme over-standardization we saw was a ratio of 8 here in our training set. So an important consideration is how much evidence we need to be confident that we've detected this ratio well. You need to know that a number you've come up with is accurately reflective of how a speaker actually talks before you can use it to process their speech. So after examining the data, it turns out that you can be 80% confident that you've correctly assigned a speaker's phoneme ratio use if you have observed 20 relevant phonemes. So that means that for detecting the S to SH ratio, you've seen 20 S's or SH's, and so forth. What 20 phones means in practice is for S to SH, 5 utterances, same for NG to N. It's slightly harder for ZH, it's 7 sentences, and harder for CH, and that should be a C at the bottom. It's 10 sentences. So at least for the more common of these, the first couple, it's very reasonable for many ASR tasks. So next I will talk about how we can use this to reweight our pronunciation lexicon. We're going to focus on one word now that has 3 pronunciations and assume that we're applying this transformation to all the words in the dictionary. So given a word that we have observed, or we know there could be 3 different pronunciations, sh, s, and I propose that we transform these counts to by transforming the counts that the word used the sh phoneme in the opposite direction from the word that uses the s phoneme. So you see here that they are inversely related, but right now, this is just a magical X factor that is presumably some continuous variable for our speaker. So what the X is the square root of the ratio observed for the given speaker divided by the ratio for the observed population. The reason we do this is the numerator reweights according to the speaker's phone ratio, and the denominator normalizes with respect to the training set. And the only thing that's left necessary to do is to restore the original probability mass of the altered frequencies, because if we in total increase the probability mass of sh and s, we've effectively decreased the mass of So we need to then renormalize so that the total count, the total modified counts of sh and s are equal to the total modified count of sh, the total unmodified count of sh and s. The strength of this approach. First, obviously, it's continuous. That was the goal in setting it out, and it is a continuous adaptation method. It uses speaker-level information, which is good because it does allow us to adapt, but it still preserves word-level information. So if there are some words that, because of their frequency, because of their use, because of whatever other factors, are more frequently fall victim to substitutions in the entire population than other words, you retain that information. It can be applied for each phoneme substitution independently. So if you have only enough speech to confidently say you know what the S to SH ratio is, and you can't say you have the ch to ts ratio, you can still modify the lexicon from what you know about the ratio you can be confident of. You can also prune this to a one best pronunciation lexicon after you've done the reweighting. This is important because we have seen that it's best to, in many applications, to use a single pronunciation dictionary. So by retaining multiple pronunciations in our base dictionary, before we do the reweighting, we can then prune to a one best dictionary that's appropriate for each speaker, given their continuous accent type. So the goals that I've set out in trying this project are to compare with the baseline that is a single static lexicon, which we have, of course, done some experiments with already, to compare it also to a discrete pronunciation modeling approach, which we've also tried this summer by clustering our speakers into strongly accented and less strongly accented groups. So that's then working with multiple static lexica. Based on the observation of how this works, I would like to refine the algorithm and also find similar continuous approaches for other accentual features. See how else this concept of continuity can be applied. My advisor for this project will be Thomas Jung from Tsinghua University, who you've just heard speak, and advising me back at Lehigh University will be my academic advisor, Brian Davison. Thank you.
Okay, so, you had a question? Okay.
I have a quick question. So, how do you propose to obtain these phone ratios?
Okay.
So there are two possible approaches. One is to simply do the phone recognition first. So assume that you have transcribed your phones using an automatic system, and simply calculate from that how many times S appears, how many times sh appears, and keep the ratio. The other possibility, which shows some promise, is to use EM and assume you have a standard speaker, assign phones, come up with a lattice of possible paths to describe the sounds you've heard, and based on what you hear there, reweight your dictionary and then go back through an iterative process.
Got a couple questions. So at the beginning you were saying that one of the motivations is that it's difficult to train on a speaker, but in some sense acoustic adaptation is kind of like training on a speaker. So it's training on a test speaker, number one. And number two, it's also kind of a continuous measure as adaptation because you're adapting in the acoustic space, which leads to the second question, which is, well, why is continuity even something that's so desirable? Because if anything, yes, pronunciation itself is within a continuous space, but when you're discriminating, maybe continuity is not really necessary to discriminate well, and when you're trying to do word array, you're trying to discriminate.
Okay.
And then number three, it's sort of arguable how continuous this reweighing of the phoneme counts is, because you're still reweighing a dictionary, but then the dictionary is discrete, which then controls discretely controls these different acoustic models. You're still in this, switching between different discrete acoustic models weighted by some probability. So it's not as continuous, say, as with the acoustic model.
Right. Okay, so the second question.
Repeat the second question.
The second question was, why is the continuity desirable? And the reason here is that one of the assumptions we were making in this project is that we wanted to find methods for dealing with sparse data. And so if you attempt a discrete clustering strategy and you want to develop several different pronunciation lexicons for different accent types, you're limited by how many speakers you have overall. So some of the clustering attempts we made actually made our performance worse because we had too few speakers to come up with a good model for each accent type. So the third question then was...
how does that solve continuity? Why does that mean continuity is...
Okay, so this allows you to have, to train a system on all your speakers that's going to be used for any speaker you encounter, but can adapt to the given speakers without cutting down how many training speakers you're using. So if you use a discrete approach and you break things into 5 accent levels, and you have 100 speakers to train on, then for each accent level you have only 20 speakers to train on. In this way, you still have enough speakers to come up with a good model. You still see a lot of words, you come up with a better distribution, but you're able to then still modify with higher resolution what type of speaker you're dealing with.
But you can still have 5 broad classes that say each is trained on a weighted portion of the training set rather than
That's true.
division of the training set.
That's true.
It's still in some sense discrete, it's not a continuous space of pronunciation.
That's true. That's something we haven't tried this summer.
2 questions. The one is you have sort of a fixed threshold and say, well, if I have enough training data or if I've seen enough to modulus ratio, then I'll go ahead and estimate things. Could you see sort of having a confidence in your ratio and then sort of not changing things very much, but still changing them a little bit once you've seen them sort of gradually fade into a full reweighting?
Yes, I think that would be quite appropriate, yes.
And then the other little bit of a concern here, at the beginning we heard that, well, when you do acoustic model adaptations, a lot of lexicon changes go away. Mm-hmm. And when you're going to compare these things, you're just looking at comparing them to other lexicon modifications, is that right?
That's correct, for now at least, yes.
So you're running into the danger that anything you're getting here may go away.
So then, what would be necessary is some interpretability between probabilities assigned to the multiple choices that recognize their pronunciations.
We have a scheduled break. If you want to go over.
No, that's fine. We can take a break now.
Okay, so we'll have a 10-minute break.
10 minutes, okay.
Yes. You guys came late.
You're not acting as MC here. That's the problem.
All right, speed it up.
Okay, speed it up, he says. Fair enough. Okay, we'll try to go through this stuff as quickly as possible. The main thing is there's a couple of student presentations. I want to make sure that the students have enough time to present their stuff. So basically, I want to talk about a little bit of the work we've done on accentedness classification, which will lay the ground for some of the future talks this morning. Basically, okay, so we've been talking about doing continuous modeling of accent. We'll be talking more about that. Right now, what I'm going to talk about is kind of a simpler idea, namely binning people into 2 bins. One more accented, one less accented. Now, there's kind of 2 approaches that come to mind. One would be to kind of do this directly, just classify a person as accented or not based on certain acoustic characteristics, whatever. Another would be, what's kind of more interesting, is since we noted there's a correlation between age and accentedness, And I think it was Jeff who asked, whether this was sort of general, and we think it is kind of probably general, at least in China, maybe in other parts of the world. Could you sort of classify people as older and sort of guess then that they may well be more accident? This seems like an interesting kind of approach. But although the former is more interesting, the latter seems to work somewhat better. Let me say something about age detection. So in various work, in particular some work of some former colleagues, former in both senses, at AT&T. So Zach and some of his colleagues had worked on doing age detection using Gaussian mixture models. Important to bear in mind in their data, this was people calling into AT&T. We didn't actually know how old the people were. I mean, it's one of the questions that AT&T asks people typically. So we didn't actually know the age of the person calling in, but they basically had judges decide, whether this person was older or not. And they were able to get a fairly decent classification accuracy, where the baseline was about 30%, the classification accuracy was 70%. Now, they had a wide range of speakers, people who were in their late teens, early 20s, all the way up to people who were in their 70s. Our age range, as you've seen, is much less. So already we've got a bit of a problem because you might believe that people's voices change from when they're a teen to when they get into their 70s, but people probably don't change too much between 25 and 50. Nonetheless, we try to do this, and we divide them into two groups, basically people under 40 and people over 40. So people over 40 are going to be the old speakers for us. We did a fairly standard approach. We took standard 39 valued MFCCs. And the other thing we tried was that plus adding a normalized value for F0. Okay, so the normalization was something that had been proposed previously by Andrea Golia, and that was also used in the AT&T age classification work. Okay, so the basic idea is you train models, and basically you have two phones, okay, one is older, one is younger. Well, actually there are four. There's female older, female younger, so you get the idea. So basically we would classify, in the training day we would simply classify people as older or younger, and then during the decoding phase you would simply predict and use the majority rule to decide which one you've got. How does that work? Well, we actually tried a sort of four-way combination. We could train on the spontaneous speech that we had, we could train on the read speech that we had, and we could test on either one. Not surprisingly, things sort of tended to work a little bit better if you did it matched, although it's interesting that, well, not in this case, but you'll see momentarily when we're actually doing accent detection directly, that you actually seem to get sharper models with read speech, but that doesn't seem to apply here. So basically the idea is the baseline in this case is 11/20, and we're able to get somewhat above that. Okay, so basically we're able to correctly classify about 14 speakers, which is interesting perhaps, but perhaps not terribly promising. Okay, so what about doing this more directly? People have also used the same kind of technique to detect accentedness. Okay, and so again work at Microsoft China. They have actually used this to classify speakers of Putonghua from 4 regions. There was Beijing, Shanghai, I forget, the other one was probably Canton, I think, and then Taiwan. And they got a correct identification ranging from 77.5% for Beijing speakers all the way up to 98.5% for Taiwan speakers, which they have an explanation for. It seems a little suspiciously high. One hopes it isn't simply because they're using different microphones in Taiwan or something, but you never know. Okay, so what we did basically the same thing, and here we got a somewhat better gain over the baseline. And here the baseline is actually 10 over 20. So in our test set, remember that we had 10 more accented speakers and 10 less accented speakers, so you get half right if you just guess. In the case of training on spontaneous speech and testing on spontaneous speech, if you use MFCCs plus the F0 information, you get the highest score that we get, which is 15. What's interesting is if you don't use the F0 information, if you look across the column from the row from read speech, what you'll see is that if you train on read speech and you test either on spontaneous or read speech, you seem to do about equally well. It doesn't happen the reverse way around. If you train on spontaneous speech and then apply it to read speech, it doesn't seem to work well at all. What this seems to suggest, and this is kind of consistent with some of the things we've observed, I think, that the read speech seems to allow you to build sharper models. Okay, and there are all sorts of possible explanations for why that might be the case. It could simply be that people who are reading, if they're able to do so, if they have a sort of a weaker accent, they're able to sort of make themselves less accented when they're reading, so they're sort of being conscious of it. But if you've got a really strong accent, there probably ain't much you can do about it. So maybe it could be that you're sort of able to build somewhat sharper models because of that. This is a guess, I don't know. Okay, so that's one kind of approach. Another kind of approach that we've used is more related to the stuff that David was just talking about, and that is to use counts of these segments. Now here we're not talking about cases where we know what the underlying segment is. We're simply looking at, imagine you had an acoustic transcription of what the person said, and you simply counted out how many S's and how many SSHs you saw, no matter which particular source they came from, whether they were underlying SHs or whether they were underlying S's or whatever. Okay, so you can imagine having these ratios, the count of S over the count of S plus the count of SH and so forth. And as we argued before, these ratios do correlate to a large extent with accentedness. Okay? So one idea is, okay, if you want to do this honestly, you'd like to do this on a decoding lattice. Basically, you don't know what the person said, but you're going to run it through the decoder and simply compute probabilities or compute counts of these different segments. So basically, what we did was a technique that we use for other things at AT&T. I won't bore you with the math on the left. Basically, the idea is you take a lattice, you apply a pushing operation to move the weights so that basically you get proper distributions of proper probabilities over the paths. The way that's represented is that every state has a probability of all paths leading into that state, and then every arc has a probability of, given that you're in that state, of seeing this arc. So if you imagine that you're in the state here and you've got this probability 0.2, that means the path up to there has probability 0.2. This node would have probability 0.3, and therefore, the probability the probability of this S here is 0.06, and the probability of this SH is 0.02, and basically, the idea is you have a whole lattice of these things, and you're simply going to sum up the counts. Okay, we're going to come up with this kind of funny notion of how many of these things are by simply summing up the probabilities. So Murat Saraçlar and I have used this in other applications for, say, doing speech retrieval. Same basic idea. So what we then do is we take these set of ratios and we simply cluster, and I say cluster in quotes because if you actually look at the distribution, you get a whole range of, basically as been pointed out several times already, there's no neat clusters. People range across the whole spectrum. The reason for using a clustering algorithm at all is simply to get an honest, unbiased, replicable way of simply drawing a plane through this cloud of points. Okay, I'm not saying there's anything correct about this cluster as opposed to some other cluster. I just want to do it so I'm not the one drawing the plane. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Now, if you do that, and we use for this we use the Cluto clustering toolkit, using the default settings for repeated bisections using cosine distance. And what it came up with for the three features that we just discussed were these two clusters here. And I'm sorry the word cluster are upside down. But the basic idea is that it's come up with these two groups of speakers. The A's along here are the accented speakers, according to human judges. The S's are the unaccented speakers, and you can see that cluster 0 is a lot of them are A's. Most of the population of cluster 0 are the accented speakers, and most of the population of cluster 1 are the more standard speakers. Okay, so basically. That's it, and so introducing this stuff now because these concepts will come up in some of the subsequent talks, and I'll turn this over now to Yanni.
Okay, so I'll focus on the techniques we have used, the adaptation, acoustic adaptation with accented speech. I'll show basically acoustic adaptation results for the accented speech, and based on our results, give some illustrations to figure out what was the problem in the acoustic adaptation for the accented speech. And after that, I'll propose the acoustic accented based modeling for each speaker of various accent. And because this acoustic modeling is also coupled with the accent detection, so we'll also propose some method to do the accent detection. So here is our our experiment, we have tried various adaptation methods to adapt the baseline system to our delicate speech. So basically, the best results we have is the one in the green box, which is actually to do the. By the way, I just mentioned that all the adaptation is supervised adaptation, and so the best results we have is to do the tree regression. Actually, the regression is doing each phoneme. It's based on each phoneme. It's not an automatic cluster, and after we do the tree regression, we do the just three iterations of MLR, and after that we split the tree further, and then do the MLR and do the MP3. So this is the best system we have, which actually we have tried some more iterations of MR and P kind of stuff, and even just one single MAP, but by this kind of iteration updating, we got the best adaptation results. So here is basically compare several adaptation results, and from the baseline we have the baseline 61% word error rate, character error rate, and if we just use the in-domain data, 6-hour in-domain data, we get the word error rate actually is 44.2, but the green number is actually shows that just the method we have showed in the previous slides, which is the best system we have. We do the adaptation, and we have a slightly better beat the baseline, actually just training on the in-domain data. And so people actually have asked questions about multiple pronunciation, various stuff, because for the accent speech, the speaker actually have some phone substitution, so it's very obvious that you need to use multiple pronunciation both in your training and the testing to see how it performs. But we did those experiments, but the results shows that okay, it's slightly better than the baseline training on the baseline system, but after we do the adaptation, actually the best system of our adaptation just beats this multiple pronunciation system. So this plot will just show that why this happens. So okay, this plot here is the we extract the Gaussian mean from our acoustic model and projected use the principal component analysis method. And this is the plot that we just plot first two component analysis. And the first plot shows that the acoustic model training on the ambient data, because the speaker is a standard speaker, so there's a very few confusion between the accented confusable phonemes, which is A's and the SH. But after adaptation, so so this one just shows after adaptation. Actually, the A's and the S sound actually, the mean distance actually getting closer, but there's still some separations. The point I want to make is that actually the acoustic modeling learned the multiple pronunciation pretty good, but okay, so. So this plot actually shows the confusion matrix that we have for the substitution, for the confusable phone substitution. So what happens is that actually after adaptation, the SH to S substitution, the SH to S substitution is actually going up, but the SH to A substitution is actually lower. and the overall performance is getting better. The reason is that actually I point out here is that because in both the training set and the test set, there are lots more SH, so the classifier tends to move the acoustic boundary towards the SH. So here is, so we will propose some method to do the accent-based acoustic modeling. Okay, here is the formalization. So other than adapted on the whole training set and getting one acoustic models for the accent speech, we proposed actually to use, for example, we have a standard acoustic models and relatively standard acoustic models and some very accented acoustic models. We're trying to find a way to combine these models for each speaker according to their accentedness. Okay, so what is going on is here that so for each speaker, because we assume that for each speaker the x1 through xn is for each speaker. So for each speaker, we suppose that the speakers are independent and the model we have are independent. So we could just factorize the speaker out, and it's actually a speaker-dependent system. What's going on here is after we factorize here, well, okay. So after we factorize the speaker, the speaker parameter, it's turned out that we actually separate the problem into two parts. The green part is actually the accent-based model selection. Okay, the A actually is the accent variable, and the purple blocks is actually point to the accent detection. So here is the example of how to use the system. Okay, so the most simple, the most directed way to use that is just Richard has introduced that we have a classifier. We classified to standard speaker and accented speaker, and we have two models which is favored. One of them is favored for the standard speaker, and one of them favored the accented speaker. So what we could do is just to do we do the accent detection first. So we say, okay, this is this speaker is accent speaker, so we use the accent acoustic models for that speaker, and if the speaker is more accent speaker, so we use the accent acoustic models for that speaker. And as the problem going on, we also figure out, because accent is a kind of a degree of the, it's not actually a continuous variable. So one of the most easy way to do that is to just linear combination of the two standard models and accented models in a clever way. Like you have an accent detector, but the detector actually give you a probability of how if the speaker is accent or unaccented. So you could kind of have a combination of these two models. And you should notice that although this purple bar is for the standard speakers, and this kind of purple. Okay, this the other bar is for the accent speakers. But we notice that even for it's true that for accent speakers and standard speakers, they have different. They probably the acoustic models is a little bit different, but it's also true that for different phonemes, they also have different characteristics. So what we are propose here is actually, so we try to class the phonemes into several sets. So which some set is very sensitive to actually have the same characteristics of the accent, and so they're actually put this way. Okay, so the accent actually have several groups, each act very differently, and so we propose that for each different group of phonemes, we try to model them differently. So this is a proposal that we do. We could also propose that method, which is just a mixture models. So just summarize what we have so far. So we have the formalization to find the best models for some specific speakers with various various degrees of accent, as we can do by combine the two systems. So one system is provide the knowledge of accent, and the other part is just to do the model selection. Okay, here now we shifted to the detection of accent of degrees. So it's very obvious that if you want to detect the accent, you want to add in some accent related features. As we have seen that before, that some phoneme ratios is actually very sensitive to the accent, and also some researchers have shown that formants and the pitches is also accent related features. So we probably want to try that, to use the multiple stream method to combine these two feature set. One is accent related features, and the other is just the regular acoustic features, and then use the multiple stream technology to combine these two models together. Here is the conclusion. So what we want to do is actually to do the accented related acoustic modeling at the acoustic level, other than doing some pronunciation manipulations. And the strategy we're using here is to separate this into two parts. One part is accent-based model selection, and the other is accent detection. Okay, so any questions?
Any questions?
Could you answer the previous slide?
Okay.
The next one? The second to last slide.
This one?
The second to the very last.
Go all the way to the end, then go back one.
This
Or
one?
this one, yeah. So, it's changed. Okay.
It's up.
Change the graph.
Yeah. I just updated because I just
Okay. Good video.
Okay, so now I'll talk about some of the work we've done to try to use how to use accents, try to help us to do a better acoustic modeling. And so before I talk about the way we do it, I would like to briefly talk about the problem first, and then we'll try to propose some way to specifically solve that problem. But the problem here, if you look at the first part of the page here, is basically it's a very general model mismatch problem. So if you say for speech recognition, we have got two sets. One is the training set, and the other is the test set. And mathematically, we want to build an optimal acoustic model based on the training set. And we assume we can accordingly generate an optimal decoder related to that optimal acoustic model. And then we think that this optimal decoder is also optimal for the test set. However, in reality, most of the time, we have got mismatch conditions between the training set and the test set. Here I listed a few of the mismatches that most of the time we observe in our real applications, like speaking style difference, noise condition difference, channel difference, and also the most important, and we are doing research here, is accent difference. So here I'll give an example of we observed in our experiments here during the 6 weeks workshop that what exactly happened because of this mismatch. So on the left side, we tried to train our acoustic model based on the broadcast news, which actually use the standard Mandarin speakers, and we get an ambient acoustic model. And on the right side, we try to carry out different experiments for different test sets. If you look at the first one, this is the match model. We try to use exactly the same kind of speakers and speaking styles for standard Mandarin, we get 19.1% character error rate, which is pretty good. And then suppose we use the same acoustic model to do another job. And here, this is for the Wu accent RAS speech. So we asked the Wu accent speakers try to read newspapers, and we tried to use exactly the same language model to do the recognition. We got much higher error rate, which is 57.4% character error rate, which means that this mostly coming from the mismatch of the acoustic models when trying to do this task. And we go a little bit further for the real task we are dealing here. Actually, we are doing testing on the Wu accent spontaneous test speech. So here that instead, rather than only the mismatch of accent, we have also the mismatch between spontaneous speech for test speakers and direct speech for training speakers. And then we got even worse result, which is 61% character error rate, which we have talked aloud before for the previous speakers. And one thing I would like to note to mention here is that these two figures, they're pretty close. So it's kind of hint that say accent is more important than accent mismatch is more important than the speaking style mismatch. Because here that these two, they are different for the speaking style. And these two compared with this one, mostly coming from the accent. That's why we are here to do research to improve the modeling for different accent speakers. Okay, so I try to talk about the problem in two ways. One way is that I'll talk about the model training for the acoustic models. The other way, I'll talk about the model decoding. So for model training, conventionally, we have got a bunch of choices, although not very much, but these are the typical approaches we have so far. So we can do map adaptation, we can do global MLR, we can do regression tree MLR. So I think that Yanli also she already talked about the best way we can do. Actually, we combine map and MLR and do several iterations to get the best performance. So here, what we propose here is we do something different. So we first do accent-based speaker clustering, and then we try to train the models with this prior knowledge of accented speak clusters during training. And we hopefully can try to get something better compared with general adaptation method. On the decoding side, we try to do the similar things. So the conventional approaches try to use either they try to decode with the model trained on the in-domain data only, or you try to decode based on like do adaptation from general standard Mandarin acoustic models to the limited domains of the Wu dialect speech models. Or you can combine these two, use maximum posterior probability to try to get a better score by using both of them. And here we try to propose a different way that we try to do the decoding using accent speech and accent speech models and the phone mapped adapted acoustic models. And further, we try to do a best selection between these two models based on accent information. So it's different from the conventional approach. And here I want to go a little bit more details about the method we propose here. Suppose we have got a waveform input. We try to first do a Gaussian mixture-based acoustic automatic accent detection, and then after we have done this automatic accent detection, we try to separate the speakers into two binary classes. One is the more accent Putonghua speaker, more standard Putonghua speaker. The other is more accent speaker. For the more standard speakers, we try to use the map adapted models. And then for the more accent speakers, we try to use the model trained on the accent speech only. And also, I'll show experimental results to see why we want to do it in this way. And before I talk about the decoding experiment result, I first to talk about the training result. So here is the experimental result that when we try to train the models by using different accented speak clusters. So the green one is the baseline system we have, and all the purple ones that we try different kinds of ways to do the training based on the accent speaker clusters. From our experiments so far here, we think we haven't got a better performance, but we assume that this is because the insufficient training data. The reason is because that we have got only about 66 hours of training data for accent speech. Whenever we try to do all kinds of clustering, we try to separate into two. So for each cluster, we've got only 3 hours. And you can notice from this chart that when we try to use, instead of to use the cluster for each model only, we try to use an accent weighted speakers, which has got much better results compared with the used one only. And it's pretty, the number of 44.775 is pretty close to the baseline there, which is another evidence that we have a problem of insufficient training data here because the weighted one.
Accent weighted means?
Which means that, say, suppose we have got 20 speakers, we know that 10 of them, they are more standard, 10 of them more accent, and then we try to double the acoustic evidence for those weighted accent speakers, and then say like 2 for those and 1 for the standard one. And this one has got the best score so far for different ways to try accent clusters. We assume that, suppose you have got a lot of training, in-domain training data, definitely we should see some gain by doing that.
So the leftmost bar, you're weighting 1-to-1, and the rightmost bar, you're
The
weighting
left
2-to-1.
part, the green part, we used all the data.
Right, but that's the same as weighting the two equally.
You weight equally.
So that's weighting 1-to-1, and
Then this is like
rightmost
1
bar,
to
you're
2.
weighting 2-to-1?
2 to 1, right.
I see, but weighting 2-to-1 is actually worse than 1-to-1.
That's because even 2 to 1, because we have limited training data, even for the standard speakers, they are still contributing to our acoustic models. Because that the limited training data, when it's separated into like 3 hours, they didn't cover all the necessary acoustic evidence. And then that's why the other more standard speakers, they try to contribute some of the distributions to the final model.
I don't understand. The one on the left, the dark green,
Yeah.
has only accented speakers.
No, they used all the speakers.
So why does it say all Wu accented speakers?
Yeah, they are all Wu accented. Just a matter that within
They are
all
all
Wu
Wu accented.
some of
the ones
them
on the right are Wu accented and
they
Putonghua.
the left one is they are all accented. The right one is that within those accented, we try to select those one more standard and more accent. So they are all accented. So this is the.
I'm sorry. And you never tried, well maybe you do and I am not fast enough to read it. You never tried a mixture of Putonghua and accented and maybe first detect who's accented?
Yeah, we tried that.
And which one is that?
You mean training? We tried this one, automatic detect into Putonghua, and so this one is that we train on.
I think what Fred is asking is, what if you do math adaptation, but you weight the different adaptation data, you weight the adaptation data differently depending on how accented they are.
Yes.
Right, we tried that. This is something that's shown here. So we use both. One way we use math, the other way we train only.
I thought all of these were with the same training only on the Wu accented data.
We have got a different, another set of similar results using the map adaptation, the one I mentioned before.
Okay.
We got similar patterns here. So it's not the listed here, but similar
But it
patterns.
should be lower, right? I mean,
We got the worst result by doing the map adaptation also with the same clusters. So that's why we assume that.
So nothing helps.
I will show later. Okay. Okay. So for the decoding part, yeah.
Just a quick question. The GMM detection of more or less accented speakers, how well does that agree with human judgments?
It's pretty good because we have got. So if you look at here, this is the human cluster speakers. Even for human clusters, so it's true. The true clusters, we got similar performance as the automatic
So
detection.
what if you take accent-weighted speakers, but you weight according to the human judgments?
I did that too. It's the
Yes.
get worse. So.
Okay.
So this is about the decoding part. And so for the decoding part is that we try to the green one is that we do a map adaptation, and the yellow one we try to train the model on the accent speech the training data only, and the horizontal axis is the number of the amount of training data we have. So like say the maximum number of training that we have is about 6 hours of training data. The one over there is that we only use 1 hour of training data. So basically what we did is like we have 80 speakers. So for each speaker, we about 80 utterances for each one. We try to subsample those utterances for each speaker, and then we get 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 and 6 hours. So the curve shows that here, what would be the trend when you try to use different amount of training data to do this acoustic model. And you can look at here that the white one is the oracle rate, which is, let's say, for each utterance, I try to use model 1 to do decoding, model 2 to do decoding. I got a character error rate for the first one, character error for the second one. I select the lowest one. So this is the cheating experiment, but this is upper bound. And the red one is that we do automatic accent detection-based selection. So we first do speaker selection, the accent detection, and based on that, if it's more standard speakers, we select the one with the map adaptation. And if it's more accent speaker, we select one with the model trained on the domain only.
This is similar to Jason's question. So if you use human detected accent, human judged accent, it would do worse than in that. Like, so if you had another plot.
No, there's no human detected one.
If there was a detection based on human judgment, it would presumably do worse because of the previous plot?
It would be, I would say be worse because even for human beings, it's very difficult to detect the accents. Here that we try to use the statistical models, actually statistical models here beat human beings because human beings don't know how to separate them. And then if you look at the curve here, at 6 hours, we actually beat the baseline. So the yellow one is the baseline one, the baseline we train the model on the in-domain only. The green one is the train on by the best map adaptation method, and we can beat the baseline marginally by using the accent selection method. So this is another approach we did like for the previous experiment, we tried to select between these two models on the speaker level. And here we try to do a further. So this is we consider another baseline, which is to try to use the ATT tools to do a maximum posterior probability combination of the lattice of model 1 and the model 2 to get the best pass. And we consider this another baseline. And instead of to do the baseline, we proposed a new approach. As I said before, we try to do the best pass selection based on accents. So we got another set of experiment results. So this time, the yellow one is the best baseline, the state-of-the-art method we have by using maximum posterior probability or push method to get this performance. And the white one is still the oracle rate selection rate, and the green one is by using the accent selection method. And you can see that one interesting thing here that the red one is pretty close to the white one, which is kind of evidence that our automatic accent selection method works pretty well. It's close to the upper bound. And so to talk about to review the problem I talked before about why we cannot get a gain on the training set by trying to weight it on those accented speakers is because the insufficient training data. So if you look at the curve, on this part is actually what we have got during our experiment, and we try to go a little bit further to some projections. So if we do some very simple projection for the curve here, we are kind of assume that we'll get better gains if we get more training data. And a little bit further, that say, here there's a cross point between these two curves, so which means that if you have got, like say, for our Wu data training data, you've got about less than 3.5 hours of training data, the best way you can do is that try to do a map adaptation and train on Wu model only and do a maximum posterior probability selection. And if
what's the amount of test data?
The 3.5 hours, 20 speakers with 3.5 hours. Test data, there are 20 speakers. And each speaker about 80 hours. 1.7 hours.
In all.
Yeah, right, for test. And then if you, from experiments, if you get something like more than 3.5 hours matched data, and to this point, the best way is to use our proposed method by doing accent-based selection. And if you go further, that into the green part here, because we assume that then you have got enough training data, and then you can do the accent speaker cluster training method, as I mentioned before. There, we should observe some gains by doing that. And then you can just forget about that map adaptation method and just use the accent speaker selection model only, and you should get the best result by doing that.
I'm not sure I fully understand this maximum posterior probability best path selection. Is that essentially you're running two recognizers and you're picking the hypothesis that has the higher likelihood?
Yeah, right. It's like we run two decoders, and then one decoder get one lattice, and the other one the lattice, and we use AT&T tool to use push method. Try to first normalize the. We try to first try to get the score for each pass for the posterior probability for each component within the path, and then we try to select the one with the highest posterior probability for each pass within two lattices, and that's the best pass.
So you first normalize the posteriors within each recognizer output,
Right.
and then okay.
And then it's comparable, and then you can compare and select the better one.
Okay.
Okay, so for a brief summary, that the problem here we are dealing with is that we have got 30 hours of mismatched training data, which is standard Mandarin. And then we have got 6.3 hours of matched data, which is accented. And then we also noticed that we tried to test on 20 speakers. There are 20 totally different speakers with different, very continuous level of accent. So within 20 speakers, 5 of them, they are very much more standard, and 5 of them, they are very much more accented, and 10 of them is something in between. So this is a very challenging test set. And then we propose, for the conventional method, we do a map adaptation, MMR, which is pretty typical for all the approaches for different sites now. And we try to do all kinds of combination experiments, and we found out that the best result you can get is that by using the hybrid system, which is maximize the posterior probability between these two models. And we propose new approaches, which that we do accent-based clustering, and we can still beat the best baseline so far we have got here. And we think the gain will be bigger if we get more matched data for training. And here this is although the improvement is not very big, but we think that it's eligible for this game. Yeah.
Did you test it for significance?
What?
Did you test whether it was was it a significant improvement?
We didn't test it explicitly, but this is significant different because we tried all kinds of other methods that usually they are within 0.1 or 0.2 methods. And even for the maximum posterior probability, with that we got 0.2% gain. Without that we get less. So we'll carry out that, but we think this is significant.
How specific is this to Chinese dialects? Because earlier it was said that the different dialects are syntactically very similar, but if you move to languages where there's more syntactic differences between the dialects, would you expect similar sorts of?
Well, we think that this is the general method because we try to use the Gaussian mixture models and try to calculate the fricative ratios there. So for different language, we just need to use a different set of features. You can either automatically generate the feature set by try to analyze the confusion matrix, or you can manually generate some and then put it into the GMM and will automatically give you an optimal accent detector. So basically, if you for a new language, you know nothing about that. You first do decoding, and then you get a confusion matrix. From there, you do principal analysis, and then try to pick out what's the most important pairs of confusion, and then you try to put them in as the feature and calculate the ratios for the decoding, and then you can do again.
So if I understood your method right, you have a lattice generated by a standard dialect recognizer, and then you compute posterior probabilities on strings for that lattice. You have another lattice generated by an accented speech recognizer. Again, you compute posterior probabilities. Right. And you have a estimated probability that the speaker is accented versus standard. Right. And then you choose whichever is higher.
Right.
Did you consider just weighting the lattices by these estimates and intersecting them?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. That I think that maybe that's the next step. So yeah, we should do that. It's
intersecting them, you look them both.
No, intersect meaning it's a merge, right?
Right.
You just so any string which appears in both, its cost over here is its posterior and the more given. So it's a posterior probability to the string given S and accent present, and over there it's a posterior probability to the string given. Yeah, you sort of weight the two acceptors and intersect.
Yeah, right now it's like extreme case. So yeah, you're right.
We have to stop questions.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about minimal complexity of word segmentation. This is trying to improve our language model given our sparsity of data by tweaking the segmentation. So in our speech recognition task, we are using a fixed dictionary. This is primarily because if you just use characters in your speech recognition task, you miss out on the character interactions within words. Therefore, our language model is best built out of words as well. And this brings us to a problem that we find in Chinese tasks, whether it be parsing or language modeling or whatnot. The fact that Chinese text comes to us without spaces, just as a string of characters, but we want to build a language model off of words. So this is a pretty well-studied problem. Many people have tried many different approaches to word segmentation. For this speech recognition task, we want to build a language model off of our segmented text. And for speech recognition tasks, we often will use something like maximum matching, which works just about as well as anything else, which takes a fixed dictionary. Maximum matching works left to right through the sentence, looks through its dictionary, picks the longest word that matches the first characters, and then continues on after that. So if our dictionary was the, there, gar, garden, den, and our sentence was THEIR, GARDN, and so forth, we would hopefully pick out something like their garden is overgrown. No guarantees. So what we noticed at some point in this project was that your dictionary and your segmentation affects the language model pretty dramatically, even though the average character length, average word length for Chinese words is less than 2 characters on average. If we start with our baseline dictionary, we get something like 15 or 10% greater than using a character-only language model. These are bigram models. We also noticed, as we tried to add more words to the dictionary, that the segmentation, even using maximum matching and the baseline dictionary, would bounce around a bit, even around that 69 number. We noticed this very early on and when I was working on the project before this test. So this brings us to a question. Is there some sort of minimal complexity dictionary? We're stuck using a fixed dictionary. We're stuck using maximum matching or some other dictionary-based segmentation technique. But is there a way we can improve the dictionary so the segmentation improves and the language model improves and the whole system improves? Brief side note, why are we using a bigram model? For our small task, we only have 1 million characters. The bigram model actually beat the trigram model. That's because our trigram model is falling back to back-off weights over and over again, and the trigram model isn't helping us any. So how are we going to improve the dictionary? This is the simple first-shot approach this past week. We're going to get counts of all words in all unigrams and all bigrams in segmented text, already segmented with our baseline dictionary and maximum matching. We're going to walk through, and if the bigram of words occurs more than a certain cutoff, and if the bigram of words accounts for a certain percentage of the first and second word occurrences, then we're going to take those 2 words, concatenate them, and add them to the dictionary, and resegment using maximum matching. This approach is related to using mutual information. It's not the same. You get similar numbers. We haven't actually used mutual information as a cutoff. And this general approach to segmentation is similar in spirit to minimizing the entropy of our segmentation or minimizing the description length. Here's an example of some words it finds. I should first explain the numbers up in the right-hand corner. So 5 is describing how many times a bigram must occur in the training corpus of our pre-segmented text. 50 is what percent of the first and second word occurrences must be accounted for by the bigram. And both numbers. We didn't actually vary them independently yet. It pulls out some interesting phrases like say clearly, not easy, not no, in school. It also pulls out some words you would have expected to be in the dictionary, like cell phone or massive palm civet, which may not have to be in the dictionary. or electronic products. And in case you're wondering what a mass palm civet is.
Yes, yeah.
Mass palm civet. Mass palm civet. We have a Latin name for it too. So here's our basic approach, our basic algorithm. And that is to first create a new dictionary by counting on the training text, concatenating words when they meet our threshold, resegmenting the text using this new dictionary and maximum matching, rebuilding the language model, testing the language model on a held-out test corpus, and then taking, if we like the move we just made, taking the segmented text that's been segmented with our new dictionary and rerunning the whole approach again, getting out new words, a new segmented corpus, a new language model. Now this brings us to a question: how exactly are we going to handle this? I mean, we can pick all sorts of parameters. We have a parameter space that could be, any size cut off the bigram words. Although at a certain point you don't add any more words if you require it too many times. How are we going to adjust the percentages? And we've tried a couple things. We haven't had a lot of time yet. One thing is to brute force it. One thing is to follow other intuitions. For example, you could pick the first add the words you're most sure of, right, which would be the far left-hand side. Then the next step, reduce the cutoff a little bit, and add words you're less sure of, but you're going to be more sure about them because you've added the words you're more sure about, and walk down the tree that way, and hope for good results. It actually works pretty well. I haven't included those in this presentation, though. If we just take the simple approach and brute force a bunch of tries for the first iteration, and then brute force everything nearby it for the second iteration, we get something like a 1.5% relative decrease. Our baseline is 69.19. We can cut it down to 68.09. Just for context, if you use a variable length character n-gram, that's around 77.29. This is ignoring some issues like smoothing. The smoothing is cats for the bigram models and good turning for the character model. If instead we take a more...
These are perplexity results on test corpus, right?
These are, yes. So we use the training corpus to get a dictionary. We resegment the training corpus, resegment the test corpus, and then find a new language model perplexity.
But the perplexity is always normalized for the characters.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I missed that at one point, so yeah, that's a good point. If instead of starting with our baseline dictionary, we ask another question, and that's what if we start with characters? In our second iteration, our first iteration, before our first iteration, we started with a worst baseline. That's what 88. It's 15%. The word baseline is 50% lower. We get quite a quick drop, even though we're only down to up to 4 character length words here and up to 2 character length words here. So there's nothing longer than 2 characters in our dictionary at this point. The comparison between the two basic comparison between the two methods, we're trying to find not the real words. We're trying to find whatever words help our language model the most, whatever those may be. So this arguably could work better than making a handcrafted dictionary. At the same time, though, a handcrafted dictionary is going to have in words we've never seen in the training corpus, and that we're not going to pick up when we do this resegmentation on the training corpus with the character-based model. An example is stepping through the iteration. This is using the word. No, this is using the character, starting from characters only as our dictionary. What kind of pants would you like? Do you like jeans or slacks? It picks up what? And it picks up like. I forget what the second one is. Cowboy. This is cowboy. This is basically or. This is leisure. And then the next iteration, it picks up cowboy pants, which is jeans. But again, we're not actually really trying to find the best words. We're trying to find what helps our language model. If we actually throw this in our system, we did this once. We just switched up the language models once, didn't change anything else. It did improve the system. It's not entirely fair because we picked this new segmentation on using the same test corpus we're decoding on. But we believe that we can improve the perplexity more and maybe maybe make it work with the speech recognition system better. There's a lot more that could be done, which brings us to the future work. We could have a more rigorous and a better thought out approach to picking our turns in the tree, such as cross-validation. We could have more systematic search of the parameter space. Our intuitions are kind of close, but we know our intuitions are kind of off by the first results we've gotten. We could also try things like going backwards in the dictionary. So given that we want to keep the dictionary, which has the words we haven't seen on the training corpus, we could break apart words in the dictionary if that actually improves our entropy. At the same time, we could brute force the whole parameter space, follow iterations like what I said, adding the words you're most sure of and then adding words you're less sure of and so forth. But also, this raises the whole question, okay, so it works well in Chinese, why wouldn't it work on English, you know? Are there ways to make a quirky dictionary with pseudo words like you might find in word synthesis ambiguation, but add pseudo words to make a different dictionary and improve your language model perplexity for English speech recognition? And that is actually the end of the future book. So.
Any questions?
Well, I have a remark, which is that the fact that your trigram complexity was higher than your bigram complexity essentially means you're not using the right smoothing.
Yeah. We didn't play with smoothing much. I've only been working on this for the past week.
Cat smoothing is known to break down when you don't have enough training data and as you go to larger
right.
ingrams.
So a good thing to do, and Sanjay was telling me this, is to rerun both of them with Canadian Eye.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Question?
I was
Yeah?
gonna mention something.
Sure.
But no, actually, but the very last point on applying it to English would be interesting to see what kind of segmentations it comes out to. At least for someone who speaks Chinese, it would be delighted to see what's going on.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you determine the pronunciation of the words you create?
We haven't toyed with that. We could. What did you say?
He was wondering how you handle the pronunciation.
Yeah. So the point is, we added new lexicon words. But we haven't added pronunciations. We haven't played with that. At one level, we could just look at this as trying to improve the language model. We could also go through and add canonical pronunciations for the phrases or words we find. I haven't.
Well, you had something where you had.
I mean, one answer to that question
is
you don't
changing
have to,
character so you must have had a pronunciation for every word that you had in that run.
No, we actually just so we kept the old dictionary for the rest of the system, and we just flipped in the new language model, which doesn't actually have to have the pronunciations associated with it. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
I think so. Okay. But yes, so maybe there'd be more gains from adding the pronunciations or other effects. We have not looked at that. We've just looked at language.
I understand they simply rescore the language.
Okay, but if you had pronunciations, then whether or not, then observing such things as does a character string have a pronunciation that doesn't factor would be relevant in deciding whether or not you should treat it as a lexicon item.
You mean deciding to reject certain new words we might have found because they don't actually help us with pronunciation? Is that what you're saying?
No, it just adds extra information to say that this, this should be treated as a separate word.
So I guess the question is, do the characters always have the same pronunciations, or does the fact that a character occurs in a particular word limit the choice of pronunciation? And I think it's the latter, right?
Right. Yes.
So that should help you, right, in artistic decoding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings
it's
a
not
lot.
all or none.
It's not clear that the words that we're adding necessarily
right.
will benefit acoustic modeling. In one sense, it doesn't matter, because the whole point here is simply to use this at the language modeling level. Okay. So it doesn't matter that they correspond to the dictionary items. But there is an issue here that there may be cases where you're adding things that could have, could have significant effects on.
But you're adding them based on frequencies, right?
Yes.
So essentially frequencies of counts, and so those are probably more likely to co-articulate. So
yeah, indeed, for exactly that reason, yes. That's right.
Right, but if you were constrained to have essentially unigram pronunciation probabilities, then this could greatly affect that, because by making new words, you're able to essentially estimate context-dependent pronunciation probabilities.
That's true.
How did you choose the thresholds?
Say what?
How did you choose the thresholds?
So given time constraints, guess and check. So like there are a couple of effects. One thing is if the threshold is too high, it doesn't add any words. Although if you make the threshold high, it adds really good words. So if you make the threshold on the word test 50, you get 30 new words, and they improve the language. They improve it. They change the complexity by 0.1.
So you did it to change the maximize complexity.
Yeah. Right. So basically, yeah, I chose by saying, okay, here's I ran 30 different tries for the first iteration. What works well? Okay, I'll pick those. Now let's see what happens if I run second iterations off of that first iteration and off of first iterations near it, because you can't actually just pick the best and pick the best and pick the best. It doesn't work.
We're running over time already. Okay. So.
Yeah. Okay, so let me try to wrap up as quickly as possible here, since we're already quite a bit over time. So basically, just to summarize what we've heard in these last couple of hours, we've come up with some new approaches to dealing with accented speech, and in particular, some of the stuff that Liang talked about. We have applied the idea of detecting accent, so not treating all the accented speakers as one class, detecting the accent, selecting the best acoustic model on the basis of that detection, and then that shows a modest improvement. So this seems to be a promise that this could potentially be a useful device. We've also developed a lot of accent-specific transforms. Yenli talked about some of these things using supervised MLLR combinations with MAP and so on and so forth. And then one of the other things we did, which I talked about, was a novel technique for determining accentedness on the basis of these phone ratios from lattices. Okay? And then finally, going back to some stuff that Thomas was talking about, at least, well, given the oracles, to suggest that maybe you can, lexicon adaptation may be worth about 1.5%, but some of the stuff that Thomas was talking about suggests that maybe there's some promise in future research in this area. As far as future work is concerned, basically, a lot of this is focused around the idea of doing continuous modeling of accentuation. So Yenli discussed this in the acoustic modeling domain. David discussed this in the pronunciation modeling domain. One other idea we didn't have time to discuss, or in fact we haven't really developed yet, is some ideas of Zach that he wants to work out with Hao, who is also on our team, and that is to have this idea that you could have a speaker, as it were, speaker-independent transform for each phone in your acoustic modeling transformations, and then you would have basically the idea would be that you would apply this n times. So basically, you're multiplying this out some number of times, and both parameters, the W matrix and the n, the power, would be something that would be trainable for each speaker. So that's an idea that seems to be interesting, and see whether it works. And then finally, as Philip just discussed, there's an interesting new approach to minimizing the perplexity of the language model by doing better segmentation. And then finally, some other ideas have been thrown out. So Thomas had some ideas on developing, extending his notion of IF mapping to syllable mapping, and also doing some kind of language model adaptation, which we haven't done any of at all in this project. And finally, the idea has been broached of using multi-stream HMMs, which would use features from hidden accent features in addition to the more standard features that you would get from acoustic model observations. And that's it. Okay.
Okay, so we have scheduled, we're running late, but we can have another 10 minutes of general discussion. So does anyone have anything general to discuss? Well, I have a question, a general question. Eric Brill says that if you want to improve anything in the natural language processing, you should not think of algorithms, you should think of getting more data. And that everything else is just silly, and until the revolution, when we come really with better algorithms, that's what we should do. It seems to me that this is contradicted by results. In other words, that I don't see any tendency that when you get more and more data, you have solved the problem.
Well,
so I'm wondering what you...
Well, I don't know. Certainly in previous work, people have collected, many hours of accented data and have indeed got better results simply by doing that. I mean, we showed that on an earlier slide. But the issue, as you know, right, the main issue is data is expensive. I mean, I don't know how much, Bill probably knows how much we pay to collect the data that we collected, right? And
Yeah, but there is a lot of Chinese in the world, and they can, they can, and at least the American unions say that their labor costs are low, and they could be honest. So if that worked, we ought to try. I mean, we could pay for it in dollars.
So the point is there are okay, so the answer, one answer to that question, right, is there are thousands of villages in China. They all have their own particular way of speaking. You ain't going to go to the thousands of villages and collect data sets from all of those places. And it's just not practical. Yes, you can create data sets for large, areas for Shanghai. We could increase this tenfold if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that for everywhere. So that you really want to start looking at techniques that are going to allow you to do adaptation, not simply brute forcing it by collecting more data.
Even though specifically in your case, you sort of used knowledge of the specific changes that were sort of derived externally.
But many of these things are well documented. I mean, there's, there are journals in China that are devoted exactly to descriptions of this kind. So
for every village.
Yeah. I mean, there's one journal, Fangyan, dialect, which deals, exactly, has very detailed descriptions of all of these kinds of things. So many of these things are quite well known, and as Thomas points out, you can make use of that knowledge.
So what is it that makes for bad speech recognition in Chinese? I mean, do we have comparable amounts of data that we have on English? I would have thought in the old days that the problem is that Americans worked on Chinese recognition. And not Chinese, but I see Chinese all around me, and they still don't get decent results. So what's the problem?
Well, I mean, one obvious problem is that the current recognition systems, including what we're doing, completely throw away kernel information, and we know that carries, it carries some.
So why don't we get down to this?
So why don't we do it? I guess and people have done
so, going back to Fred's original remark, what Eric Bill thinks, I think that the answer is that as you get more and more data, you can afford to do smarter and smarter things. Like we saw here, there's some critical amount of data that you need to model accent. And for instance, in English recognition, if you don't have enough data, you can't do gender-specific modeling, right? But once you do have enough data, it gives you a win. So the question is, how do you get sort of data with just enough of supervisory information? So for instance, in English, we can get tons of broadcast news data because we have the closed captioning system, which produces transcripts that are, good enough actually to train acoustic models. I don't know what the situation is in China. I suspect they don't have closed captioning or not as to the same extent. No? Yeah.
But one we can do this like also in the U.S. here we have got an approach that we try to put recorder on all kinds of call centers around the country.
Yeah, but someone has to transcribe it, right? Someone has to transcribe it.
We do for IBM that we try to transcribe part of them. We observe improvement even for untranscribed acoustic data. So you can, if you
training with untranscribed, completely unsupervised.
We try to we do automatic coding for all untranscribed data. We set a threshold automatically, and then we retrain the model. We get a pretty decent gain by doing that.
Yeah, I would expect to get some gain, but it sort of levels off because at some point.
Right. But transcription is really expensive. For English, we send them out to India, and for Chinese, that we can do it in China.
But the interesting thing is whether in a problem like this, as opposed to transcribing broadcasting, which is as you add more data, whether the diversity among the accents of people doesn't kill you. I mean, if you increase your variance as you add more data, you're not going to win. And that's an unanswered question because I know of one or two projects that work on that much accent of speech, and even though there's a very large amount of accent in English available, so you may not be able to solve the problem by overwhelming it with data, because the data is inherently very variable. So you may have to model as well.
But that's exactly the point that we need to propose, like say, I'll say
No, I'm
that
in favor of your
because
approach.
we
I'm trying to support it.
Exactly. We need to like say, okay, for the current speech recognition, the research side is that we try to rely on those data, and people from different sides try to develop all kinds of methods. And suppose we have, say, 10 times more data, and we can be luxurious to build more complex models, so that we can do like involve accent information into the model, and then we can do much more complex mathematical models compared to we have now, because we have more data. And there that we can, although we don't know what comes out, but that's kind of research, and that's for the history of human being, that's the way we can improve our technology in this way.
Okay, any other?
Okay. So I have 2 points which are related. Many years ago, I was a consultant to an SRI project where the point was to automatically grade the pronunciation of French by Americans. And so what they did was to first ask some native French speakers who were language instructors in a CIA school for 20 years, what they felt distinguished American pronunciation of French from the French pronunciation of French. And careful notes were taken, as well as the way in which the R's are trilled, the nasalization, et cetera, et cetera. And then they built machine algorithms to try to encode this expert knowledge into distinguishing between good and bad pronunciations of American speaking French. What they found was that the intuition of the instructors was completely wrong, that in fact the best single parameter was syllable duration and syllable timing. And I wonder whether you may have a similar problem here, in that you have certain intuitions about what distinguishes the so-called accent of different parts of China, but you may not necessarily be correct, or at least entirely correct. And I wonder if you've thought about doing some structured machine learning experiments to try to figure out what truly is discriminating between Wu and the class.
That's a good point that we did. So okay, one thing we didn't mention is that we try to use humanly. So one way we do automatic accent detection to do decoding, we got improvement. However, we do humanly, like say, ask human being to separate the test speaker into accent speaker and non-accent. We got worse with that, because that I assume that even for human being, that the human being is not consistent about accents, and we are doing statistical methods. So assume you have got matched data between your training set and test set, and then you can, by doing GNN or statistic models, you can automatically learn something which is like statistically important, and then you based on confusion matrix, that you try to minimize the cost function, which that cost function is exactly the one you want for the testing set. So actually in this way, that at least for our experiment here, that automatic accent detection beats human being for testing.
So I would also suggest looking at the literature on speaker recognition, because accent detection has many similarities with that. And in recent years, it has been shown that a whole variety of features, some of which are actually duration features, essentially, work extremely well on top of the standard, spectral features that people have been using for decades. And so also this, using phone recognition output essentially works very well. And so this reminded me of your finding dealing with this phone occurrence ratio. So I think it's worth looking into that.
Anything else? We have another minute. No, okay, well, thank you very much. We are at 1:30 sharp, and those who are having lunch with Astrid should assemble around us. And I'll take you over where the lunch